The wind came up the ridge sometime after 2 in the morning, and I was already awake because the cattle bells had been wrong for an hour. Not louder, not closer. Wrong in the way a song you know goes wrong when someone plays it on a different instrument. The bells had a particular tinny brightness on a still night, the sound of thin metal against thin metal, and what I was hearing had gone soft like the clappers had been wrapped in cloth. I sat on the edge of the cot, with my socks half on, and listened to them move along the slope below the tower, and I could not make my hands finish putting the socks on because my hands were too busy holding on to my own knees. I had been on the mountain long enough by then to know what wrong sounded like. The job was fire lookout for the Roan Mountain district, high on the bald where Tennessee runs into North Carolina, and the ridge runs like a long green spine above everything with a name. The tower sat on a knob just north of Round Bald, 30 feet up on steel legs bolted into the rock, with a cab on top the size of a small kitchen and a catwalk around it, and a wooden ladder up the outside that I had come to hate. Ranger District Office called it Lookout 7. Nobody I had met in town called it anything at all. Round Bald was the name they used, or just the Bald, or up top. Nobody said Lookout 7 except the ranger who paid me. I had taken the job because I needed the money, and because the man who took it before me had walked off in the middle of a shift and had not been seen since. His name was Ellison Petrie. He was 61. He had been the lookout at Lookout 7 for 8 seasons. His truck was still parked at the trailhead where the maintenance road ended and the walking trail began, an old red Toyota Tacoma with a bumper sticker that said Roan Mountain State Park in bleached-out letters. His keys were in it. His wallet was on the dash. The state police had processed the truck and gone home, and the ranger district had held the position open through August and then given up and posted for a temporary replacement. And I had answered the posting because I had been laid off in April from the Kingsport paper mill, and I was 34 years old, and my ex-wife's lawyer was writing me letters about a garage full of things I had not come to collect. The letters were in a green folder on the passenger seat of my own truck, which was parked next to Petrie's at the trailhead. I had not opened the folder in 3 weeks. I had not opened it because I had not yet figured out what to feel about the fact that the letters used the word marital as if it still applied to anything. The ranger who hired me was a woman named Denise Cutler. She was maybe 40. She had a French braid down her back that she redid every morning while she talked, and she had a habit of finishing sentences by tapping her pen twice against her clipboard, which meant either that she was moving on to the next item or that she was waiting for me to say I understood. Both, sometimes. On the day I drove up to meet her at the district office in Bakersville, she said, without preamble, "We do not know what happened to him. Tap, tap." I said, I understood. She said, "He may have walked. He may have gotten lost. He may have had a stroke and fallen, and we have not found the body." Tap, tap. I said I understood. She said, "If any of this bothers you, this is the moment to say so." Tap, tap. I did not say anything. She stood up and shook my hand and gave me a printed sheet with the radio schedule and the resupply schedule and the phone number I was to call if I saw fire, which was 911, and then a second number for the district office and a third number for what she called the interagency line. She said, "Do not call the third number unless you actually have fire on the ground." Tap, tap. I said I understood. She walked me out to my truck and stood beside it with her arms folded. She said, "One more thing." I nodded. She said, "If you hear anything on the ridge that sounds like a person, do not answer it. Do not go looking. Do not use the radio to describe what you are hearing. Log it in the book. That is all." She did not tap her pen after this. She looked at me until she was satisfied that I had not treated it as a joke, and then she got in her own truck and drove back down the mountain to the office. I thought about that instruction for the whole drive up to the trailhead, and I decided that Denise Cutler either believed there were bears on the ridge that she did not want a new hire to shoot at, or she had a very particular idea about what had happened to Ellison Petrie. I did not decide which. I did not want to decide which. I parked next to his old red Tacoma and shouldered my pack and walked the 2.5 miles up the trail to the tower with my head down and the strap of the pack cutting into my shoulder because I had loaded too much coffee and not enough spare socks, which is the exact kind of mistake you make when you have not been in the woods since your daddy stopped taking you. The tower stood on a knob at the north end of a saddle between two balds. The balds were the strange treeless meadows that ran along the ridge for miles, high grass with rhododendron thickets scattered through them like clots in old blood. You could see for 40 miles on a clear day. The tower cab was painted white on the outside and had windows on all four sides, and inside it had a metal roof and a wood stove and a cot and a small propane cooktop and a battery-powered radio and a big brass instrument bolted to the middle of the floor called an Osborne firefinder. The firefinder had a topographic map disc in it and a sighting arm that you rotated to line up on a plume of smoke, and it told you the azimuth so you could report the direction of a fire down to the 10th of a degree. It was very old. It was heavier than it looked. When I first came up the ladder and unlocked the door and set my pack down on the floor, the firefinder was the only thing in the cab that looked like it belonged there, and everything else, including me, felt like I was borrowing space from a man who had not signed off on the loan. Petrie's things were still there. That was the part I had not expected. The ranger had not cleaned out the cab. His parka was on the hook. His paperback was face down on the little shelf by the cot, a John D. MacDonald with the cover creased soft. His enameled coffee cup was upside down on the drying rack. His flashlight was hanging from its lanyard by the door. His last log entry was written in a neat draftsman's hand at the top of a fresh page in the logbook, and the entry read, 23rd of July, 0600 hours. Clear. Light breeze out of the northwest. 2 coyote herd at the tree line before dawn. No smoke visible. That was it. Whatever he had done next, he had not written it down. I stood there for a while, with my pack on, and I looked at the parka, and I thought about walking down to the trailhead and driving home and telling Denise Cutler I had changed my mind. I thought about the letters in the green folder. I thought about my landlord in Kingsport, who had left me a voicemail on Tuesday that ended with the phrase, "You know how these things go, Marcus." I thought about the interagency check on the radio at 1800 and how I had 2 hours to get to it, or I would have to explain why I did not. I set my pack down on the cot and hung my jacket on the hook next to Petrie's, and I said out loud to nobody, "All right then." That was the first day. The first day was ordinary. The next 3 days were ordinary too. I got a system. Up at 0530 for the morning check. Coffee on the propane. The radio call at 0600 to the district office. Then a walk around the catwalk with binoculars while the sun came up over the North Carolina side of the ridge. The ball turned gold at that hour, and then it turned green as the sun cleared the trees, and then it turned a pale washed color for the rest of the day, and you could see for miles. There was a herd of feral cattle down along the slope on the Tennessee side. They were leftovers, Denise Cutler had told me, from the grazing leases the Forest Service had let expire in the 1980s. Nobody owned them. Nobody rounded them up. They wore old bells because their grandmothers had worn old bells, and the bells passed down through the herd the way superstitions pass down through a family, and they moved along the ridge in a slow line every morning and every evening, chewing at the bald grass. They were skittish. They did not come near the tower. I watched them through the binoculars, and I named a few of the ones I could tell apart. There was a bull with a white face I called Preacher, and a heifer with a torn ear I called Emmy, and there was a black cow with a stiff-legged walk I called the Judge. The bells they wore made a light sound on the wind that I got used to the way you get used to a clock ticking in a room. The interagency radio was on a repeater, and it caught chatter from other lookouts up and down the range. There was a woman at Camp Creek Bald who read a chapter of a novel out loud to herself every night at 10 o'clock, softly, because she thought her mic was off. There was a young guy at Big Bald who liked to say "Roger that" in a bad John Wayne voice. There was an old man on the North Carolina side, somewhere near Grandfather Mountain, who checked in with the district office in a hoarse murmur that had a fatigue in it I recognized. On the morning of my fourth day, I was drinking coffee and listening to the North Carolina lookouts talk about a lightning storm the night before, and I looked at the logbook and read Petrie's last entry again, and I thought, he wrote that at 0600 on the 23rd, and he checked in on the radio because his check-in is in the district office's log too, and then between 0600 and 1100 he walked off this tower and did not come back. And where in that window did he go, and what did he take? Because his coat is still here and his wallet was in his truck. I did not have an answer for it. I put the logbook down. I finished my coffee. I walked the catwalk. I logged the morning as clear with a light breeze out of the west. It was clear. The breeze was out of the west. I did not put in the log that I had spent 20 minutes looking at a dead man's parka. The first night the bell sounded wrong was the 7th night. I had gone to bed a little after 10. The cot in the cab had a wool blanket on it and a mummy bag over the wool blanket, and I slept in a t-shirt and boxers with my jeans folded on the floor beside the cot in case I needed them fast. The cab had 4 windows and no curtains. The moon that night was 3 days past full, and the light lay on the floor in 4 long white parallelograms, and I lay in the cot and listened to the cattle bells for a while before I went to sleep. They were doing what they usually did, moving along the slope, chewing, occasional soft chime. I had come to like the sound. It was the closest thing to human company on the ridge. Around midnight, I woke up because the cabin door was rattling. I lay there for maybe 20 seconds and listened. It was not the wind. The wind had not been blowing when I went to sleep. The rattle had a rhythm to it, not a knock, more like a slow, steady pull, the way a dog paws at a screen door when it wants in. I got up and put my jeans on and picked up the flashlight and stood by the door, and I said, "Who is there?" There was no answer. The rattling stopped. I stood there for a full minute. Nothing. I opened the door. The catwalk was empty. The moon was down over the ridge, and the sky was full of stars, and the wind was not blowing, and I could not hear the cattle bells at all. That was the first thing I noticed. The bells had gone quiet. I stood on the catwalk in bare feet, in my jeans and my t-shirt, and I looked down. The herd was in the saddle below the tower. They were standing in a rough cluster, maybe a dozen of them, not moving. They were all facing the same direction. Not toward the tower, toward the tree line on the east side of the saddle, the dark wall of spruce and fir where the bald ended and the higher forest began. I lifted the flashlight and swept the tree line. Nothing, just the edge of the woods, dark, unmoving. I stood there for a long time. The cattle did not move. I began to feel foolish standing there in bare feet on the cold metal of the catwalk. I went inside and closed the door and got back in the cot and lay awake for another hour. The bells did not start up again that night. In the morning I logged the door rattle and the silence of the herd, and I underlined the underline of my own hand because I could not decide if I had been dreaming any of it. I wrote, "Possible dream." I underlined possible. Then I made coffee and looked out at the saddle, and I did not see the cattle at all, not anywhere. Not that morning. The cattle came back that afternoon. I saw the judge first, coming up over the lip of the saddle at about 3 in the afternoon, walking the same stiff walk, moving toward the water trough that a Forest Service crew had installed for the herd a mile north along the ridge. 2 others followed, then the rest, in 1s and 2s, no bunching up, no hurry. Their bells were fine, the sound was fine. I stood on the catwalk and I watched them come across the bald in a long, slow, ragged line, and I felt like a man who had been holding his breath and had just now been given permission to let it out. Denise Cutler radioed at 15:30 for a spot check. I gave her the weather. I gave her the wind. She asked how I was doing. I said I was doing fine. There was a pause on her end, and then she said, "All right." Tap, tap, I imagined. On a clipboard I could not see. She signed off. I did not tell her about the door rattle or the silent cattle. I told myself I did not tell her because I was still on probation, and I did not want her to think I could not handle the isolation. That is what I told myself. The truer reason was that the door rattle was already starting to feel like something I had made up, and if I said it out loud on a radio channel that other people could hear, I would have to defend it, and I did not have the energy to defend a rattle. That night I slept with my flashlight in the sleeping bag with me. I did not sleep well. Nothing happened. Day 8, Day 9, Day 10. The bald cycled through its colors. The herd moved along its slow track. I did the log entries. I did the radio checks. I read half of the John D. MacDonald that Petrie had left on the shelf. I tried not to think about the fact that A Stranger's Paperback still had a bookmark in it, and I was reading past that bookmark. I got through Denise's next resupply on Day 9, when a young ranger named Kyle brought a mule up the trail with fresh water and canned beans and a bag of oranges and a stack of newspapers wrapped in twine. Kyle was maybe 22. He had a gap between his front teeth and a slow smile, and he sat with me on the catwalk for 20 minutes, drinking coffee out of an enamel cup that had been Petrie's, and he did not seem to know or care that it had been. He asked how I was liking it. I said fine. He asked if I had seen anything strange. I said no. He looked at me for a beat longer than the question deserved, and then he grinned the gap-toothed grin, and he said, "Old Ellison used to say the mountain talks to itself up here, and if you listen too hard, you start thinking it is talking to you." I asked what that meant. Kyle shrugged. He said a lot of things. He was a talker. I did not know how to answer that, so I did not answer it. Kyle finished his coffee and mounted the mule and started back down the trail, and he waved once from the switchback, and I waved back, and then the mountain was quiet again. The 11th night was when the name came out of the trees. I was on the catwalk. It was about 11 at night. I had done the last log entry, and I had come out to look at the stars, because the sky above Roan Mountain, when it is clear, is the closest thing to a cathedral I have ever stood inside of. There was a good moon. The bald was silver. The cattle were down on the saddle chewing. I had my hands in the pockets of the parka that had been Petrie's, because it was too cold for my own jacket, and Petrie's was hanging right there, and it fit me. I heard the sound before I recognized it. It came from the tree line about 200 yards east. It was a voice. It was calling a name. Marcus. Marcus, come on down. I froze. I had my hands in the pockets of Petrie's parka. My fingers curled into fists inside them. The voice was old, male, familiar. It had the register of somebody I had known well and had not spoken to in years. It had the slight rasp of a smoker. It had a particular way of pushing the second syllable of my name that only one person had ever done, and that person had died in 2014 in a hospital in Johnson City, and his name was Roy Halsey, and he had been my father. Marcus. Marcus, come on down. It is cold up there. I stood on the catwalk with my hands in the parka pockets, and I did not move, and I did not breathe, and I felt my heart doing something inside my chest that felt like a bird trying to get out of a paper bag. The voice called my name a third time. The cattle were still chewing. That was the thing that saved me. The cattle were still chewing. They had not stopped. They were not standing in a cluster, facing the tree line. They were doing what they always did. Whatever was calling my name, the cattle could not hear it, or did not care about it, or knew better than to acknowledge it, and I have thought about which of those three things it was every night since. I stood on the catwalk, and I made myself remember that Denise Cutler had said, "If you hear anything on the ridge that sounds like a person, do not answer it." And so I did not answer it. I stood there for a long time, my hands cramped inside the parka pockets. My breath fogged in front of my face. The voice did not call again. After a while I went inside. I did not close the door slowly. I closed it hard. I turned the little brass lock on the handle, which I had never turned before, because the tower was 30 feet up on steel legs, and there was nobody up here to lock it against. I turned the lock, and I sat on the cot in the dark, and I listened for the voice for a long time, and I did not hear it again that night. In the log I wrote, 23rd August, 2330 hours. Voice from tree line on the east side of the saddle. Male. Called my given name. I did not respond. Cattle. Unaffected. I stared at the entry for a while, and then I added, underlined for emphasis by the writer, and then I underlined it. I did not know who I was underlining it for. Somebody who would read the logbook after me, maybe. Somebody who would come up to Lookout 7 in August of some year that I was no longer around to work it. I underlined it because I wanted the next man to see that I had known and I had not answered. I did not sleep that night. I stayed on the cot with my back against the wall and my legs across the blanket and Petrie's parka over me and the flashlight in my hand, and I watched the 4 white parallelograms of moonlight travel across the floor and then off the floor and then across the wall and then off the wall, and by the time the sky started to lighten, I felt like I had been beaten with a piece of pipe. I called Denise Cutler at 0600. I did the weather. I did the wind. I did the visibility. I said, no fire visible. I said, all quiet on the ridge. I signed off. My voice was steady the whole time. I do not know how. I hung up the mic, and I sat on the cot, and I put my head in my hands, and I stayed that way for a long time. Around noon that day I went through Petrie's things. I had not done it before. It had felt like a violation. Now it felt like the only thing to do. His parka was on the hook, and I had already been wearing that. His paperback was on the shelf, and I was already reading that. His enamel cup was on the drying rack, and I had drunk out of it and given it to Kyle to drink out of. But there was a footlocker under the cot that I had not opened, a green metal one with his name stenciled on the lid in white letters. And I dragged it out into the middle of the floor, and I sat cross-legged in front of it, and I opened it. Inside were the things a man kept when he lived in a small room for 8 seasons of his life. A pair of boots, a hooded sweatshirt with a Tennessee Volunteers logo faded almost to white, a stack of paperbacks, a tin of loose tobacco, a pipe, a framed photograph of a woman in her 30s, standing in a garden, holding a baby, both of them squinting into a Sunday sun, both of them long since old or gone. A folded American flag in the small, tight triangle that meant a funeral. A brown leather-bound notebook with a rubber band around it. The notebook was what I was looking for. I took the rubber band off. It broke as I took it off, because it had been on the notebook a long time. I opened the notebook. Petrie's handwriting was the same neat draftsman's print that filled the logbook. The notebook was not a journal. It was more like a private log. A record of things he had seen up on the ridge that he had not put into the official book. The entries went back 9 years. The first entry was dated the 4th of July, 2015. It read, First season, Kyle Barnes sighted a fire southwest at azimuth 242. Called it in. Was actually a controlled burn on the Carolina side. Note to self, call Carolina District first next season. I flipped through the pages. Most of the entries were dry. Fire calls, weather notes, mule schedule, personal things. On the 6th of August, in 2017, he had written, Wife passed. Denise let me take the week. Kyle covered. Came back on the 15th. Nothing changed up here. Everything different down there. I stopped for a second, and then I flipped on. The entries got stranger over the years. Not steadily, in bursts. On the 12th of August of 2019, he had written, Bells went wrong last night. Cattle silent for 2 hours. Rattle on the door around midnight. No one there. Nothing on the catwalk. Below the entry he had drawn, in careful pencil, a small sketch of the cabin door with an arrow pointing at the latch and the words, Rattles from outside but no wind. I stared at the drawing. Further on the 3rd of September of 2021, he had written, Heard my brother's voice from the tree line last night. Called my name. My brother has been dead 31 years. Did not answer. Was on the catwalk. Cattle did not react. Note. If you cannot hear the bells, it is not talking. If you can hear the bells and something else, it is. I read that entry 3 times. Further on, 14th of September, 2023, same thing. My mother this time. She called me son, and she called me by my given name. She said, Come down out of that tower, Ellison. Cattle chewing the whole time I did not answer. Further on. 22nd of July, 2026. This year, my year. The entry was dated one day before Petrie's last logbook entry. The entry read, "It is different this season. I hear it in the daytime now. It is up in the rhododendron across the saddle. I have not seen it. It has stopped using voices I know. Yesterday it called me by a name I have never heard. I do not know whose name it was. It called me the name a second time an hour later, and I have written the name below so that whoever comes after can know. If you find this book, and the name below is your name, get down off this mountain. Do not answer the radio if it uses this name. Do not go to the tree line if it uses this name. Do not stay in this cabin after dark. Denise knows some of it. She does not know all of it. Do not tell her about this book. She will make it into a case. She has to close, and there is no closing it." Below the entry, in the same neat draftsman's print, Petrie had written a name. The name he had written was Marcus. I sat on the floor of the cab for a long time with the notebook open on my lap. The wind had come up outside, and it was pushing at the cab windows and making the metal roof tick with the little contractions of temperature that a metal roof makes in changing weather. I read the entry once more, and then twice more, and then I read every entry from the year before and every entry from the year before that, going back and back. And I sat there until the light in the cab had shifted from noon light to afternoon light, and my legs had gone numb from sitting. I thought about a lot of things while I sat there. I thought about my father, who had died in Johnson City in 2014 with a plastic tube coming out of the side of his neck and a look on his face that I had spent 12 years trying to forget. I thought about Denise Cutler and her double tap on the clipboard, and I tried to figure out how much she had known when she hired me. I thought about the young ranger Kyle and his slow gap-toothed grin, and I thought about the phrase Kyle had used, "The mountain talks to itself up here," and I wondered if that phrase had come from Petrie or from Denise or from someone else entirely, and I wondered if it was a warning that had been passed down the way the cattle pass down their bells, from mother to daughter, in a herd that nobody owned. I thought about my ex-wife, who had told me once, near the end, that I was the only man she had ever met who could sit alone in a room for 6 hours and come out of the room angrier than he had gone in. She had meant it as an accusation, but I had taken it as a compliment because I had already made up my mind to leave her, and it seemed like a useful skill for the road ahead. I thought about all of that, and then I closed the notebook and put the rubber band back around it, and I put the notebook back in the footlocker, and I closed the footlocker and slid it back under the cot, and I stood up and my legs buzzed with the pins and needles, and I went out on the catwalk to look at the ridge in the afternoon sun. The cattle were on the saddle. The judge was there. Preacher was there. Emmy was there. They were chewing. I thought about walking down the trail. I could have. I had 2.5 miles to the truck, and I could have been on the road to Bakersville before dark. I had money in the bank. I could have driven to Kingsport and spent the night on my brother-in-law's couch, if he had still been my brother-in-law, which he wasn't. I could have driven to Knoxville and asked Denise for my last paycheck through the mail. I could have done any of that. I did not do any of that. I stayed, because I did not know how to leave a job I had said I would do, and because the letters in the green folder in my truck were still going to be waiting for me when I got down there, and my landlord's voicemail was still going to be on my phone, and I was still going to be 34 years old and broke, and a man whose father had died with a plastic tube coming out of his neck. And because, if I am being honest about it, I had opened a book that had my name in it, and I had a feeling that the mountain would take the name back down with me if I left, and I did not want to find out. I stayed for the same reason a lot of men stay in a bad place, because leaving felt harder than the bad thing was on the day I would have had to leave. Day 12 was quiet, in the way that a room where a fight has just ended is quiet. I did the morning check. I did the walk. I logged clear weather. I ate cold beans out of the can because I did not want to use the propane, and I did not know why I did not want to use the propane. I stayed inside the cab most of the afternoon and read the John D. MacDonald without registering any of the words. Around 3 in the afternoon, I got up and walked the catwalk once, and I stopped on the east side, and I looked out over the saddle, and I saw a strange thing that was probably nothing. There was a place in the rhododendron thickets where the leaves had been disturbed. It was not much. It was a patch about the size of a bathtub where the leaves lay a little flatter than the leaves around them, as if a large animal had lain down there in the morning and gotten up and gone. I looked at it through the binoculars. It was maybe 120 yards off. The leaves in the flattened patch were the wrong color. Not brown, not green. A paler washed color, the color of leaves that had been under snow for a winter and had come out in the spring, but there had not been snow. It was August. The leaves around it were green. I lowered the binoculars. I lifted them again. The patch was still there. I lowered them again, and I did not lift them again. I went inside the cab and I sat down on the cot and I put the book on my chest, and I stayed there for a while looking at the ceiling. I did not want to know what had lain in the rhododendron. I did not want to know how long it had lain there. I did not want to know how many other patches like that were scattered through the thickets across the saddle, because I had a feeling that if I went looking for them, I would find enough to make a pattern, and the pattern would not be a pattern I could live with. The cattle came and went along the saddle. The bells were normal. I did the evening check at 1800. I did not tell Denise Cutler what I had read in the notebook. When I signed off, she said, "You sure everything is all right up there, Marcus?" Tap, tap. I said, "Everything is fine." She did not press. She wished me a good night. That night, at what I later confirmed was 02:17 in the morning, the radio spoke. It spoke in Denise Cutler's voice. I know it was 02:17 because I looked at the little wind-up travel clock on the shelf as I sat up in the cot. The voice had woken me. It had come out of the radio and gone right through the cab and gone into the top of my sleep and pulled me out by the collar. The voice said, "Marcus, Marcus, are you there? It is Denise. I need you to come out on the catwalk. Marcus." I sat up. The cab was dark. The moon was down. The radio was a black rectangle on the shelf by the firefinder, with one small red LED on the front that was on when the unit was on. I stared at the red LED. It was on. The voice said, "Marcus, come out on the catwalk. I need you to look at something." The voice was Denise's. It was exactly Denise's. It had her cadence and her pitch, and it had that slight impatience she got when she was working through her list of items. It even had the pause before she said my name, where I could almost hear the tap of the pen on the clipboard. I did not move. I did not answer. I sat with my hand on the flashlight, and I watched the little red LED. The voice said, "Marcus, do you hear me? I need you on the catwalk." There was no static. There was no click of the mic being keyed. On a real transmission, the mic clicks when the sender presses and releases the transmit button, and there is a burst of quiet static as the carrier drops. This voice had none of that. It was in the room. It came out of the speaker, but it was in the room. The voice said, "Marcus, it is important. Come out." I did not move. The voice said my name in Denise Cutler's voice 5 more times over the course of what I later worked out to be about 10 minutes. Then the voice stopped. The little red LED stayed on. I stayed on the cot. I watched the LED for a long time. Sometime after 3 in the morning, I got up and I unplugged the radio from the 12-volt battery pack, and I sat back down on the cot and I watched the LED go dark. And I stayed watching the empty little rectangle on the shelf until the sky started to turn gray in the east. I did not go on the catwalk. I did not open the door. I did not turn the radio back on until 05:30 when I needed to do the morning check. When I keyed the mic for the morning check, I felt like a man reaching into a hole where he knew there was a snake. I said, "Roan 7 to district, radio check." There was a pause, and then Denise Cutler's voice came back over the radio, but this time with the click and the burst of static, and this time with the small, tinny quality that the repeater always put on her voice. And this time she said, "Copy Roan 7, morning." And I gave her the weather and the wind and the visibility, and I signed off, and my hands were shaking on the mic. And I did not tell her that at 02:17 that morning, something had been in the cab with me, speaking through the radio in her voice, and asking me to come out on the catwalk. I sat on the cot after the morning check, and I understood something for the first time. I understood how Petrie had gone missing. He had not walked off. He had come out on the catwalk in his sleep, or in his fear, or in his loneliness, at some hour of some night, because a voice had asked him to, and he had answered. And whatever had asked him had been waiting for him at the base of the ladder, or in the rhododendron thicket across the saddle, or in the tree line where the spruce grew thick, and he had gone to it. He had gone to it because the voice had known him. He had gone to it because he was old and tired, and because a name is a leash if you have been alone long enough for someone to put one on you. I got up. I sat down. I got up again. I put on Petrie's parka, and I opened the cab door, and I stepped out onto the catwalk, and I looked down the ladder. There were tracks at the base of the tower. I could see them from where I stood, 30 feet up, in the dust of the little worn clearing at the foot of the steel legs. The tracks were long and narrow, and they made a pattern that did not resemble a human foot, and did not resemble a bear, and did not resemble anything I had ever hunted or trapped or read about. They were paired. They came out of the rhododendron on the east side of the tower, and they went in a straight line to the base of the ladder, and they stopped at the ladder. They did not go up. I stood on the catwalk in Petrie's parka, and I looked at the tracks, and I felt my mouth go dry. The wind came up. I heard the bells. They were normal. I do not know how long I stood there. When I went back inside, I locked the door, and I sat on the cot, and I put my head in my hands, and I laughed, one dry laugh, because I had just realized that Petrie had underlined his warning to me the same way I had underlined my log entry to him. 2 men, 7 years apart, underlining a message for the next fool who came up the ladder. That morning I made a decision. I decided I would sit out one more day and one more night, and then I would walk down. I decided I would not tell Denise Cutler over the radio because I did not trust the radio anymore. I would tell her in person, at the office, and I would give her the notebook, and if she fired me for abandoning post, it would be worth it. I would take a picture of the tracks first. I would go down the ladder in full daylight at high noon, when whatever it was would be least likely to be near, and I would take the picture, and I would come back up, and I would sleep through the afternoon, and I would go down in the morning. That was my plan. It was a bad plan. I knew it was a bad plan when I made it. The good plan would have been to walk out immediately in the light and never come back up the ladder. But I had convinced myself that the tracks were evidence, and the evidence needed to be documented, and I was still at that hour capable of convincing myself of things that a saner man would have laughed at. At noon I went down the ladder. A steadier man would have gone down slow. I did not. I went down fast, with the phone in my back pocket set to camera mode, because I did not want to give myself time to change my mind. My boots hit the dust at the base of the tower, and I turned around and I looked at the tracks. They were fresh. That was the first thing. There had been dew that morning, a heavy dew, the kind that turns the bald silver just before dawn, and the tracks I was looking at had disturbed the dew. That meant they had been made after dawn. That meant they had been made while I was inside the cab this morning, after I had unplugged the radio and before I had come out to look. The second thing was the pattern of them. They were paired, like I said, 2 long, narrow prints, side by side, but they were not shaped like feet. They were shaped like something that had gone up on tiptoe and pushed into the dust with the front of a thin foot and left a shallow trailing scrape behind. Not a boot, not a paw, not anything with a heel. I got down on one knee, and I took 3 pictures with the phone, and I stood up and looked around. The rhododendron thickets on the east side of the tower were about 40 yards off. They were dense. They were the kind of thicket that a bear could disappear into, and you would never know. The bald was empty in every direction. The cattle were nowhere I could see. I turned around and started up the ladder. I got about 6 rungs up when I heard the bell stop. I froze on the ladder. My hand was on the wooden rung above me, and my foot was on the wooden rung below me, and my other hand was on the outside of the leg of the tower, and I stood very still, and I listened. The bells had stopped. I could not hear the cattle. The wind had died. The bald was silent in the way that a room is silent after someone has just left it. I looked over my shoulder. There was something at the tree line, not in the tree line, at the tree line, standing where the spruce began. I could not see it clearly. It was tall and it was thin and it was pale, but not white, the color of old bone that had been in weather for a long time. It stood on two long legs, and its arms hung at its sides, and its head was too small for its body, and it did not move. I could not see its face. It was maybe 200 yards away. It was watching the tower. I did not scream. I did not move. I looked at it, and I felt something happen inside my chest that I had never felt before, a kind of cold, slow blossoming behind my sternum, and then I turned my face back to the ladder, and I climbed. I climbed one rung at a time. I did not go fast. Something inside me had decided that going fast would tell the thing at the tree line that I had seen it, and I did not want it to know I had seen it. I went up the ladder at the slow, steady pace of a man who thought there was nothing at all wrong with his day, and I reached the catwalk and I stepped over onto it, and I did not turn around. I opened the cab door, and I stepped inside, and I closed the door, and I locked the little brass lock on the handle, and I sat down on the floor with my back against the door. I sat on the floor with my back against the door for a long time. When I stood up, my legs shook. I went to the window on the east side of the cab, and I looked at the tree line. The thing was gone. The cattle were on the saddle. The bells were sounding. It was as if nothing had happened. I sat on the cot. I unplugged the radio again. I did not do the afternoon check. I did not do the evening check. I did not answer when the radio speaker, which I had unplugged from the battery pack, made a small tinny sound at 1800, a sound that I told myself was impossible because I had unplugged it, a sound that I told myself I had imagined because a radio that has no power cannot speak. I did not check the radio. I did not turn my head toward the shelf. I sat on the cot, and I looked at the wall, and I waited for dark. When dark came, the wind came with it. The wind was hard that night. It came out of the northwest, and it hit the cab full on the flat side, and the whole tower flexed a little on its bolts, the way a fire tower does. The small give of steel that lets it survive weather that would take down a rigid building. The windows chattered in their frames. The stovepipe rattled where it went through the roof. I had not lit the stove that night because I did not want the light of it in the windows. Around 11, I heard the ladder. The ladder was made of pressure-treated wood on steel rails, and it had a particular sound when weight went on it, a soft creak from the second rung, a deeper creak from the sixth, a high whine from the little metal bracket that held the 10th rung to the rail. I had gone up and down that ladder 30 or 40 times in the past 12 days, and I knew every sound. When something started up the ladder that night, I heard the second rung creak first, and I sat up in the cot with my breath stopped in my throat. The 6th rung creaked. The 10th rung whined. The rungs were spaced about 14 inches apart. There were 22 of them. Whatever was climbing was taking one at a time, at the slow, deliberate pace of a man who did not want to fall in the dark. I sat on the cot and I counted. 2nd rung. 6th rung. 10th rung. Silence for a moment. Then the higher rungs. I did not know their sounds as well, because I did not usually stop to listen at those heights. But the ladder was flexing now. I could feel it through the floor of the cab. A little pulse of weight, every 14 inches, coming up the outside of the tower. I got off the cot. I stood in the middle of the cab. I picked up the flashlight, but I did not turn it on. I picked up the little hatchet that Kyle had brought up on the resupply, the one for splitting kindling, which was the closest thing to a weapon in the cab. I stood with the flashlight in my left hand and the hatchet in my right, and I waited. The rungs kept coming. 10, 12, 14. The ladder stopped flexing at the top. I heard something step off the ladder onto the catwalk. The catwalk was steel grating. Whatever it was made no metallic sound at all. It weighed nothing on the grating. It might have been a shadow crossing. It walked around the catwalk. It walked all the way around, past the east window, past the south window, past the west window, past the north window, and back to the door. It went at a pace that was not in any hurry. The sound of its feet on the grating was less than a sound. It was a suggestion of a sound. It was the sound a leaf makes falling through the branches of a tree before it hits the ground. It stopped at the door. The door had a little brass lock on the handle. I had turned the lock. The lock was in place. For a long time, nothing happened. I stood in the middle of the cab with the flashlight and the hatchet, and I did not breathe. The voice came through the door. The voice this time was not Denise's. It was not my father's. It was not any voice I had ever heard. It said, "Marcus, Marcus, come out." The voice was flat. It had no music in it. It had no cadence, no personality, no accent. It said my name like a machine reading my name from a card. It was not trying to imitate anyone. It was not trying to trick me. It was calling me because it had learned my name and it wanted me to come out. I remembered what Petrie had written. It has stopped using voices I know. Yesterday it called me by a name I have never heard. I stood in the middle of the cab with the hatchet in my hand, and I understood something else. I understood that Petrie had reached a point at which the thing had stopped bothering with the trick, and the trick was not necessary anymore, because he was tired enough and lonely enough that his name coming out of the dark was reason enough to open the door. "Marcus," the voice said again. I did not answer. The voice said, "Marcus, come out." I did not answer. The voice said, "Marcus." There was a pause of maybe a minute. Then something touched the door. Not a knock, a touch. The way a hand rests on a surface, it is deciding whether to push. The touch stayed. It did not go away. I could feel it through the door, because the door was thin, and the pressure of the touch made the door bow toward me by a fraction of an inch, and the little brass lock made a small metal click as the strike plate took the strain. A braver man would have stood there in the middle of the cab and steadied himself and made a plan. I did not do any of that. What I did was I sat down on the floor with my back to the cot, and I put the flashlight down, and I put the hatchet down, and I picked up the notebook. I had left it on the shelf. I do not remember picking it up. I have thought about it, and I do not remember standing up, and I do not remember crossing the cab, and I do not remember reaching for the shelf, but I was sitting on the floor, and I had the notebook in my lap, and it was open to Petrie's last entry. And I read the entry again. "If you find this book, and the name below is your name, get down off this mountain." I looked at my name on the page. The touch on the door had gone. The voice had gone. I did not know when either had ended. The wind was still up. The stovepipe was still rattling. Somewhere below the tower, a very long way below, the bells were sounding. That meant the thing was gone. That meant the cattle could hear the wind and the ridge again, and the mountain was itself again for a little while. I sat on the floor with the notebook in my lap. I read the last line of the entry. Denise knows some of it. She does not know all of it. I sat there until dawn. I do not remember most of the walk down. I remember the ladder. I went down the ladder at first light with the notebook in the inside pocket of Petrie's parka and the hatchet through my belt, because I had not been able to make myself put it down, and my pack over my shoulder with what fit inside. It, which was not much. I remember the tracks at the base of the tower were gone. The wind had come up strong in the night, and it had scrubbed the little worn clearing clean, and there was nothing to photograph and nothing to show. I remember thinking that the mountain had cleaned up after itself, and that it had done so on purpose, and I remember thinking that whatever had cleaned up did not think of what it had done as cleanup. It thought of it as putting the room back the way the room was supposed to be. And I was leaving the room, and the room would go back to being what it was, whether or not I was in it. I walked the trail, down to the trailhead. I did not turn around. I did not stop. At the trailhead, my truck was parked next to Petrie's red Tacoma. I got in my truck. I sat behind the wheel for a while. The green folder was on the passenger seat. The keys were in the ignition where I had left them. I did not start the truck. I got out. I walked over to the red Tacoma. I looked in the driver's window. The wallet was still on the dash, where the state police had left it. Petrie's keys were still in the ignition. I stood there for a long time. Then I walked back to my truck. I got in. I started the engine. I drove down the mountain. I did not tell Denise Cutler what had happened. I mailed her the keys to the cab and a resignation letter, and I told her only that the isolation had been too much, and that I was sorry for leaving her short. She called me twice in the following week. I did not answer either call. On the second one, at the end of a voicemail that had not started as an angry voicemail and had not ended as one either, she said, "Marcus, if you ever want to talk about what happened up there, you have my number." I did not call her back. I kept the notebook. It is in the second drawer of the desk in the apartment I have now, in Kingsport, and the rubber band around it is a new rubber band, because the old one broke when I took it off. Petrie's entry is still in there, with my name written under it. I have not opened the notebook in a long time. I have not gone back to Roan Mountain. I do not go into deep woods at all if I can help it. I have a cat now. She is a stray I took in. She sits on the arm of the chair in the evenings, and I read to her a little sometimes, because it is nice to have something in the room that knows I am there. The cat's name is Emmy. I named her after the heifer with the torn ear. 2 weeks after I came down off the mountain, on a Tuesday night in September, I was in bed and I was almost asleep, and the phone on my nightstand made a small noise. It was not the ring. It was not the buzz of a text message. It was a small click, like the click of a mic being keyed, and then a burst of quiet static, and then nothing. I sat up. I looked at the phone. The screen was dark. There was no notification on the screen. I picked it up and I looked at the recent calls list, and there were no recent calls. I put the phone down. I lay awake for a while. The cat was on the arm of the chair. She was looking at the phone. I got up. I unplugged the phone. I took the battery out of the phone. The phone is a modern phone, and it is not supposed to have a removable battery, but I have owned this phone for a long time, and I know how to get the back off it. And I got the back off it, and I took the battery out, and I put the battery on the kitchen counter, and I put the phone on the counter next to it, and I went back to bed. The cat was still on the arm of the chair. She was looking at the counter now. I lay in the dark for a while. Then I turned my face to the wall. Then I turned my face to the ceiling. Then I closed my eyes. Sometime after that, in the dark, in a voice with no music in it, my name came out of the wall. Marcus. I did not answer. Marcus. I did not answer. I have not answered. I am still not answering. The old man at the counter of the BP in Loudendale would not stop looking at the map I had folded on top of my sandwich, and finally he said, "You are not going into the state forest, are you, son?" And I said I was. And he said, "For how long?" And I said 2 weeks, and he set my change on the counter without putting it in my palm and said, "Then you had better keep your fire lit at night." He looked me in the eye when he said it. He was maybe 70. He had a hand tremor. He had a wedding ring worn thin as a wire around a finger that had been broken and healed at an angle. He did not smile. He did not blink. I said, "Thank you for the coffee." I put my change in my pocket, and I walked out of the BP, and I got in the truck, and I sat with the sandwich in my lap, and I did not open the sandwich. Through the windshield, I could see the old man watching me from behind the register. He watched me until I put the truck in reverse and backed out, and he was still watching me when I pulled onto Corridor G and headed south. That was the first day. That was before I saw anything. My name is Wesley Corbett. I go by Wes. I was 38 years old that August, and I had been working as a survey tech for Merit Land Services for 6 years, which is one of the smaller consulting outfits that gets hired by pipeline companies to walk proposed routes through terrain that other outfits will not touch. Merit liked me because I did not complain, and I did not miss deadlines, and I could carry a total station up a 50-degree grade without dropping it. That August, I had been hired out to a company called Blue Ridge Midstream, which had a plan to run a 12-inch natural gas line from a compressor station near Cabin Creek to a hookup point south of Charleston, and the shortest route on paper went right through the western half of Kanawha State Forest. On paper, nobody had put boots on the ground on that route. That was my job. 2 weeks, solo, mark the corners, take the shots, log the terrain, come back with a preliminary map. I say solo. There was a second crew scheduled for the eastern half of the forest, and we were supposed to meet in the middle around the 10th day. But that crew was a father and son operation named Halton, and I had never worked with them, and I had been given a radio frequency to try if I needed them, and told otherwise to stay in my lane and not bother them. That was fine with me. I had done 10-day walks alone before. I had a good camp kit and a good pack and a satellite messenger from Merit that could send preset check-ins to the office in Beckley, and I had a rented Blue Ridge midstream truck loaded with survey gear and food and enough fuel to run the generator at base camp for a month if I had to. Base camp was a cleared spot on an old logging road, about a mile inside the western boundary of the forest, where the Forest Service had given the company a permit to park a work trailer and a portable john. The trailer was already there when I got in. The keys were under the step where they said the keys would be. Inside the trailer there was a fold-down cot and a 2-burner propane stove and a battery bank and a card table and a folding chair. That was it. There was one window over the cot and one door and a metal roof that ticked in the sun. I had been to a lot of camps like that. Nothing about it was strange. I drove down to Loudendale the afternoon. I got in because the trailer had no cell service and I wanted a hot sandwich and a phone signal before I lost both for 2 weeks. That is when I met the old man at the BP. That is when he told me to keep my fire lit at night. I did not think about it much. I have worked pipeline for 6 years, and there is not a small town in Appalachia where a man over 60 will not give a stranger a warning of some kind if the stranger is going into the woods. Do not step off the trail after dark. Watch for copperheads. Watch for meth cooks. Watch for old mine shafts. There is always a warning. Most of them are true. Most of them are not the reason I keep my fire lit at night. I had heard the fire warning before from a woman at a gas station in Buckhannon 3 years back, who had told me it was a bear warning. Bears do not like fire. I had assumed the old man in Loudendale meant bears. That was the shape my mind gave the warning, because that was the shape my mind was set up to give warnings that came in the flat voice of a working West Virginian in a gas station. I did not think about the old man again until the second night. By then it was too late to have thought about him any earlier and made any difference. The first day of survey I did the western property line. It was easy work. The forest boundary was already flagged from a Forest Service compliance survey the year before, and I just had to walk it and reshoot the corners and log any encroachments. The ground was steep in that part of the forest. Laurel and rhododendron thickets in the low places, hardwood ridges above them, the ridges topped with old-growth oaks that had missed the last 3 timber cuts because they were on ground too steep to skid. The air was warm and heavy. There was a smell in the low places that I noticed a couple of times, a sulfur smell, like a struck match that had not yet caught. But I did not think much about it because a lot of the low places in that county had old drainage from abandoned mine works upstream, and the water carried the smell. Coal country. You get used to it. I set the corners. I ate a granola bar on a rock at noon. I saw 2 grouse, a black snake, and a lot of squirrels. I saw no bear sign. I saw no deer sign. I did notice in a couple of the low places that there was no deer sign at all, which was odd because Kanawha State Forest is thick with whitetail, and I had expected to see rubs and tracks and scat all over. I logged that in my field book. I did not know what to do with it. I logged it because I log everything. I got back to the trailer at about 6 in the evening. I made a can of chili on the propane stove, and I sat in the folding chair outside and I ate the chili and I looked at the sky. The clouds were high and thin. The sun was going down behind the ridge to the west, and the light was doing that green gold thing that light does in the mountains in August when the humidity is high and the air is holding a lot of pollen. Very pretty, very quiet. I lit the fire ring in front of the trailer because I had brought a small folding grill and I like a fire in the evening. I put on a pot of coffee. I sat and watched the fire, and I did not think about anything in particular. Around 9, the smell came. At first I thought it was the fire. I have burned wet pine before, and it has a bad smell. I got up and I looked at the fire, and the fire was fine. The wood was dry. The flames were clean. The smell was not coming from the fire. It was coming from up the slope. It was that sulfur smell, but stronger, and there was something underneath it that I had not smelled during the day. A meat smell. Not fresh meat, not old meat either, somewhere in between. It made the coffee in my mouth taste tinny. I stood by the fire, and I looked up the slope. The trees on the slope were thick, and the light was almost gone, and I could not see more than 50 feet in. The smell was strong enough that I could taste it. I stayed still. Something moved in the trees. It was maybe 40 yards up. It made a sound like a heavy body shifting on dry leaves. I could not see it. I could hear it. It moved once, and then it stopped, and I stood by the fire for a long time waiting for it to move again. It did not move. I could still smell it. The smell did not fade the way a smell fades when the source moves off. The source had not moved off. It was standing up the slope from me, and it was waiting to see what I did. I did what any man would have done who had a fire ring and a truck and a work trailer with a door that locked. I got in the trailer. I closed the door. I turned the little slide bolt on the inside. I sat on the cot with my back against the wall, and I waited. The smell stayed for another hour. Then it went. I do not mean it faded. I mean it went, the way a person goes when they get up off a bench and walk away, all at once. One moment I could smell it. The next moment I could not. And after it went, I heard, from up the slope, one soft, heavy thump on the ground and then a long silence. I did not open the door until morning. In the morning I made coffee on the propane stove, and I ate a granola bar, and I put my boots on and I walked up the slope. I did not want to. I did it because I had a job to do, and the job required me to walk transects on that slope for the next 2 days, and I could not walk transects on a slope I was afraid of. That is how I put it to myself, standing at the door of the trailer, looking up at the trees. I said out loud, "You have to walk it now, or you will not walk it at all." My voice sounded thin in the quiet. I took the rifle. I had brought a bolt-action .308 in the truck because a merit survey lead is required to carry protection in bear country, and there had been a paperwork item for it in Beckley, and the rifle was in a hard case behind the driver's seat. I got it out. I loaded 5 in the magazine and 1 in the chamber. I put on the safety. I hung it on my shoulder by the sling, and I started up the slope. 40 yards up, at about the place where I had heard the movement the night before, I found the ground. The ground was disturbed. Not much. A patch of leaf litter about 6 feet long and 2 feet wide had been pressed down flat by something heavy that had lain there for a period of time. The leaves in the patch were flat and stained. There was a dark stain along the length of the patch, brownish, not quite dry. I got down on one knee and I looked at it, and I did not touch it. There was hair. Just a little. White hair. Coarse hair. Not soft. The strands were maybe 4 inches long. They were caught on the low branches of a laurel next to the patch. I stood up. My knees felt strange. I looked around. The patch was at the base of a big red oak. From where I stood, I could see the fire ring at the trailer 40 yards down the slope. I could see the door of the trailer. I could see the folding chair. I stared for a long time. Whatever had been on that patch of ground had lain there in a position where it could watch me sitting in my folding chair, eating my chili, drinking my coffee. I did not touch the hair. I took a picture of it with the phone. I moved up the slope. I had my transects to run. I ran them. I stayed on the rifle for the rest of the day. I did not see anything else that could have been sign of the thing. I did see, on the far side of the ridge, where the ground dropped into a long draw with a creek at the bottom, a place where the leaves had been raked in a long swath about 10 feet wide, as if a heavy body had been dragged from the creek up and over the low bank and away into the laurel on the other side. I did not follow the drag. I logged the location. I moved on. I got back to the trailer at 6 again. I ate a cold sandwich from the cooler because I did not want to be outside cooking after dark. I ran the generator, and I sat inside the trailer with the door open and the rifle across my lap, and I wrote up my field notes on the card table. I did the satellite check into Beckley at 1800. The check-in was a preset text that just said, "All good, no evac needed." I sent it. I did not tell Beckley about the smell, or the patch of ground, or the hair. I did not know how to tell Beckley about the smell. Merit Land Services is a small company, but it is a company, and I was a contractor on a project, and I did not know how a field report about a bad smell was going to look on the invoice. I closed the door of the trailer at 7:30. I turned off the propane lantern at 9. I lay on the cot in the dark with the rifle beside me on the cot, and I listened. Nothing moved on the slope that night. The smell did not come. I slept badly. I had a dream in which the old man at the BP was standing by the fire ring outside the trailer, holding a small dog on a leash, and the dog was looking up at the slope, and the old man was looking at me through the window over the cot, and his mouth was moving, but no sound was coming out. I woke up at 4 in the morning. I did not go back to sleep. The next day I moved north, along the western boundary. The route I was supposed to survey took me up over a hardwood ridge and down into a shallow drainage that had once been mined and reclaimed back in the 1970s, and the reclaim had grown up in dense, head-high scrub. It was ugly going. I lost time in the scrub. I did not finish the transect. I got back to the trailer at 7, later than I had wanted. It was almost full dark by the time I had the door closed. I did not eat that night. I did not turn on the lantern. I lay in the dark on the cot with the rifle across my chest, and I listened. At about 10, I heard the smell. That was how it came to me the second time. Before I could see anything, before I could hear anything, I could smell it, and my mind had already started to hear it before it arrived. That is a strange thing about being afraid of something. Once you know what it smells like, you can feel it coming from a distance. Your nose is faster than your ears. The smell came in through the little vents on the front and back of the trailer. Sulfur and meat, same as before. I lay on the cot, and I did not move. My hand was on the grip of the rifle. Then I heard it walking. It was on the road. The old logging road that ran past the trailer on the north side, the same road my truck was parked on. It was coming down the road from the west. Its steps were slow. They were heavy. They were paired. 2 feet at a time, not 4. It walked upright. That was the thing that made me sit up on the cot with my heart in my throat. It walked upright. The gait was wrong for a bear. A bear can stand up on 2 legs, but it does not travel on 2 legs. This thing was traveling on 2 legs, and its pace was heavy and in no hurry, and it was coming down the logging road toward the trailer. I sat up on the cot. I brought the rifle up. I pointed the muzzle at the door. It walked past the front of the trailer. I heard it. Its feet made a sound on the packed dirt of the road, a soft, heavy thump followed by a scrape, like a foot that had a hard claw at the front of it dragging. Thump, scrape, thump, scrape. It went past the trailer. It went past the truck. It went to the fire ring. I heard it stop at the fire ring. Then it made a sound. Not a growl, not a roar. A low huff, like a cow chuffing at flies, but deeper and slower, and it went on for maybe 5 seconds. It was not angry. It was interested. It was standing at the fire ring where I had cooked my chili the night before, and it was smelling the ashes, and it was making a small sound in its throat that told me it liked what it smelled. I sat on the cot with the rifle pointed at the door and my mouth open in the dark, and I did not move. I could feel my pulse in my temples. I could feel it in my hands. The rifle was steady, but only because I was holding it so hard. I was making my whole body tremble underneath the steadiness. The thing at the fire ring huffed one more time. Then it moved. It walked once around the fire ring. Then it came toward the trailer. I heard its foot go up onto the front step. The step was a folding aluminum step that Merritt had put on the trailer. It made a small metal groan under the weight. The weight was significant. I could not guess it. I did not want to guess it. The step was rated for 400 pounds, and it did not fail, but it groaned like it was under load. The thing was at the door. The door was thin. It was a hollow core aluminum residential door with a little slide bolt lock on the inside. I had turned the slide bolt when I came in. The slide bolt was a 2-inch piece of metal that went into a strike plate on the frame. It would not hold against much. I sat on the cot with the rifle up, and I aimed for the middle of the door, and I waited. The thing at the door made a sound. It was not the huff. It was a different sound. It was almost a bleat. It was a wet, high sound, brief, cut off, more like a lamb than a bear or a dog. And it was the worst sound I had heard in my life because it was small and it was hungry and it did not belong in a body that had walked upright and left a stain on a patch of ground where an oak grew. Something touched the door. Not a knock, a press. The door bowed inward by 1/4 of an inch. The slide bolt made a small metal click as the strike plate took the strain. I held the rifle steady. I did not squeeze the trigger. Some part of me, the part that had walked pipeline routes for 6 years, was thinking, "Do not shoot through the door. You do not know what is on the other side. Wait, wait, wait." The press stayed. It did not increase. It was as if the thing at the door was leaning on the door, its full weight against it, and the door was holding, but only just. Then the press let up. The door creaked back into its frame. I heard the thing step down off the step. I heard its foot hit the ground. Thump, scrape. It walked away. It walked around the trailer once. All the way around. I tracked it by the sound. It went along the north side, past the vent under the sink, and around the back, past the vent over the cot, where it stopped for a moment, and I could hear it breathing right on the other side of the wall behind my head, its breath a wet, slow rhythm, in and out, on the other side of a piece of aluminum sheeting, the thickness of a beer can. It stayed there for maybe 30 seconds. Then it moved. It went around the south side, past the truck, and back to the road. Its footfalls receded up the road to the west. Thump, scrape, getting smaller, getting quieter, gone. The smell went with it, not all at once. This time, it faded. It faded for maybe 10 minutes, and then it was all the way gone. I sat on the cot with the rifle pointed at the door until dawn. I did not send a check in to Beckley the next morning. I did not go out to survey. I sat in the folding chair inside the trailer with the door open a crack, and I watched the fire ring, and I watched the road, and I ate cold Vienna sausages out of a can. I was trying to think. I could not think well. My mind kept coming back to the sound at the back of the trailer, the wet, slow breathing on the other side of a piece of thin metal, and I could not make my mind move past it. Around noon I made a decision. I decided I was going to drive down to the BP, and I was going to buy the old man a cup of coffee, and I was going to sit him down at one of the 2 tables they had by the window, and I was going to ask him what he had meant when he had told me to keep my fire lit at night. I locked the trailer. I put the rifle in the truck. I drove down to the BP. The old man was not there. There was a young woman at the register with a nose ring and a book open on the counter. I asked her about the old man. I described him. I said, "Older guy, wedding ring on a thin finger, kind of a hand tremor." She looked at me for a beat. She said, "You mean Delmar Witt?" I said, "I did not know his name." I said he had been here 2 days ago when I came in. She said, "Delmar has not been in for a week. He had a stroke last Thursday. He is at the CAMC in Charleston. He is not doing good." I stood at the register for a minute. I said, "He was here Tuesday. He rang me up. He gave me my change." She looked at me like I was a man who had come in from a hard sun without a hat. She said, "No, sir. It has not been Delmar since Thursday. I have been on the register every day since. Whoever was here Tuesday was not Delmar." I looked at her. I looked at the counter. I looked at the racks of chips and the coffee pot. I could not remember exactly what the old man had looked like anymore. I could remember the tremor in his hand. I could remember the wedding ring on the thin finger. I could remember the way he had said, "Then you had better keep your fire lit at night." I bought a coffee. I put a 5 on the counter. I did not wait for the change. I got in the truck. I sat in the parking lot for a while. I did not know what to do. Then I did the thing that I have thought about many times since, and I do not know if it was the right thing or the wrong thing. I turned the truck around, and I drove back up to the trailer. If I had gone the other way, if I had driven to Charleston, if I had gone to the CAMC and asked for Delmar Witt and sat by his bed and asked him what he had actually meant about the fire, I do not know. Maybe the same thing would have happened. Maybe not. It does not matter. I did not do that. I drove back to the trailer. I got there at 3 in the afternoon, full sun. The trailer was where I had left it. The fire ring was where I had left it. The truck fit into its spot. I got out. I got my rifle out. I walked around the trailer once, and around the fire ring, and up the slope to the patch of disturbed ground where I had seen the hair on the laurel 2 days before. I wanted to see if there was more sign. Fresh sign. There was. The disturbed patch had been widened. It was now maybe 10 feet long and 4 feet wide. The stain was darker. There was more hair on the laurel. And there was a track in the mud at the edge of the patch that I had not seen the first day because it had been in a bad shadow. The track was a print. It was clear. It was the print of a foot. And the foot was not human, and it was not a bear, and it was not any animal I had ever put a track book to. It was long and narrow. It had 2 large forward toes, each ending in a heavy claw, and a smaller rear toe with a smaller claw. The whole print was maybe 14 inches long. The mud around the print had been compressed to a depth of about half an inch. Whatever had put that print in the mud had been heavier than me. It had been heavier than me by a lot. I took pictures. My hands were shaking so hard the phone kept coming out of focus, and I had to hold the phone braced against my leg to get a clear shot. I got 3 clear ones. I put the phone away. I stood there for a while and I looked at the print. I looked at the trees. Then I heard something down the slope, behind me in the direction of the trailer. A small metallic sound, like the door of the trailer opening, except I had locked the door, except my keys were in my pocket. I turned around. The door of the trailer was open, not swinging in the wind. Standing open, I could see it clearly through the trees. It was pulled all the way back against the outer wall of the trailer. The little slide bolt had been broken off the frame, and there were long shining scrapes down the side of the door where something had gripped it and pulled. I brought the rifle up. Nothing came out of the trailer. Nothing moved on the road. The sun was full and yellow on the roof of the trailer. Somewhere overhead, a jay was calling. I stood there on the slope with the rifle up, and I did not know what to do. I do not know how long I stood on the slope with the rifle up. Long enough that my arms started to ache. Long enough that the jay stopped calling and moved to another tree. Long enough that my sweat cooled on the back of my neck, and the fear that had been white and sharp started to settle into a duller, heavier feeling in my stomach. Then I walked down the slope. I did not go quietly. I did not go loudly. I walked at a normal pace with the rifle at low ready and my finger indexed along the receiver above the trigger, and my eyes on every window and every corner of the trailer. Nothing came out. I stopped at the fire ring and I looked at the ashes. There was a print in the ash, the same print I had photographed on the slope. One clean print in the cold ash, pressed in deep, with the 2 heavy forward claws and the small rear claw. Something had come to the fire ring and put its foot in the ashes, and stood there for a while. I moved around the trailer. Nothing. No sign of the thing on the ground around the trailer except its prints, which came out of the woods on the north side, tracked across the road, went to the fire ring, went to the door, ripped the door, and went back into the woods on the south side. It had not stayed. It had done what it came to do, and it had gone. I stepped up onto the step. The step had a bend in it, aluminum bent by a big weight. I looked at the door. The slide bolt was hanging by one screw. The strike plate had been pulled entirely off the frame. The door itself had 4 long parallel grooves down the outer face, cut clean through the paint and into the aluminum, the width of the grooves matching the width of the claws in the print, not clawed at random. Cut through in a specific direction, from the top of the door to the bottom in one long pull. Whatever had opened the door had gripped it and pulled it open the way a man pulls open a drawer with a broken handle. Deliberate, not frantic, not enraged. I went in. The trailer was intact inside. Nothing had come in. That was the first thing that struck me. The door had been opened, but the trailer had not been entered. The thing had opened the door in the middle of the afternoon while I was up the slope, and it had looked into the trailer, and it had not gone inside. It had left the door standing open, and it had walked back into the woods. I sat down on the cot. I put the rifle across my lap. I put my head in my hands. I sat like that for a long time. I do not know exactly when I decided that I had to try to raise the Halton crew, but by the time I looked up at the small window over the cot, the sun had moved across the sky, and I had a plan of sorts in my head. The plan was this. I had a two-way radio that Merritt had given me for coordination with the second crew. The frequency was in a laminated card on the card table. If I got up onto the ridge to the east, I could probably raise them. The Halton crew was working the eastern half of the forest, which meant they were probably 3 or 4 ridges over, but a two-way with a good antenna would carry that far in mountain country as long as I had elevation. I did not have elevation from the trailer. I had elevation on the ridge to the east, so I would drive the truck up the old logging road that climbed the ridge, and I would set up the radio at the top, and I would raise them, and I would tell them what was happening, and we would figure out what to do together. That was the plan. It was a bad plan, too. It was a bad plan because it required me to go up onto the ridge with a rifle and a radio and be on the ridge as the lights started to go. And if I had thought about the plan for more than 10 minutes, I would have seen the problem. I did not think about it for more than 10 minutes. I was still shaky from the door, and I was working on adrenaline and grief for a version of the trip that was not going to happen. And I got up, and I got the radio, and I got the rifle, and I put a bandolier of extra rifle ammo across my chest, and I got in the truck and I drove east. The old logging road that climbed the ridge was rough. It had not been graded in 20 years. There were washouts and slumps, and I had to get out twice to move a fallen limb. The truck growled up the road in low gear, and I could smell the transmission working hard. It took me 40 minutes to get to the top. At the top, there was an old skid landing where loggers in the 80s had piled logs before hauling them off, and the landing was overgrown but flat, and there was a good view down into the drainages on both sides of the ridge. I parked. I got the radio out. I set it on the hood of the truck. I set up the little collapsible antenna. I keyed the mic. I said, Halton crew, this is Corbett with Merritt. Do you copy? There was static. I waited. I said again, Halton crew, this is Corbett. Do you copy? The static broke. A voice came back. It was a young man's voice. It was thin and it was scared. It said, Corbett, this is Sam Halton. Do you copy? I said, Copy, Sam. What is your position? There was a pause. Sam Halton said, We are at our base camp on Trail 17. My dad is hurt. I said, How hurt? Sam Halton said, He is bad. He is real bad. Something got him last night. It got in the tent. We drove up to the trailhead this morning, but the truck will not start. We have been on the trail all day. I said, You said something got him. There was static. Then Sam Halton said, I do not know what it was. I did not see it good. My dad shot at it and it ran off. He is bleeding bad. His side is opened up. I stood there on the skid landing with the radio in my hand and the sun going low over my shoulder, and I thought about the print in the mud and the smell in the trailer and the huff at my fire ring, and I said, Where are you now, exactly? Sam Halton said, I am at the truck. My dad is at the tent. It is half a mile down the trail from where I am. I could not get him to the truck. He is too heavy and he is losing too much blood. I came back to the truck to try to start it. It will not start. The battery is dead. I do not know why. It was fine yesterday. I closed my eyes for a second. When I opened them, I looked west, back over the ridge I had climbed, at the drainage where my own trailer was. I could see it, the little silver box of the trailer, a mile down through the trees. I could see the road that ran past it. The sun was going down behind the ridge to the west, and my whole drainage was in the long shadow of the ridge. I said, "Sam, listen to me. Where is your trailhead?" Sam said, "It is on Forest Road 19. The pull-off at Trail 17. Do you know it?" I said, "I can find it. I have a map. Are you at the truck now?" Sam said, "Yes." I said, "Do not go back to the tent. Stay in the truck. Lock the doors. I am coming for you." There was a pause. Sam said, "My dad is at the tent." I said, "I know he is. But you cannot help him if you get killed too. Stay in the truck. I am coming." Sam did not answer right away. When he answered, his voice was smaller. He said, "All right." I said, "How long can you hold this frequency?" He said, "I have a good battery. The truck battery is dead, but I have got the handheld. I can hold this frequency all night if I have to." I said, "I am coming. I will check in when I have you in sight." I put the mic down on the hood. I looked at the map on the card table in my head. Forest Road 19 ran along the far side of the ridge I was on top of. To get to it, I had to come down off my ridge, cross a drainage, and go up over another ridge, or take the long way around on the paved road, which would put me at Trail 17 from the north side. The long way was safer for the truck. The short way was faster. The short way was maybe an hour. The long way was maybe 2. The sun was already touching the tops of the trees on the west ridge. I took the short way. I do not remember the drive well. I remember dropping down off my ridge on the old logging road and coming down into the drainage below in a series of switchbacks with the truck in low gear and the transmission howling. I remember crossing the creek at the bottom of the drainage on a wooden bridge that felt too thin for the weight of the truck. I remember climbing the ridge on the far side on a road that had not been maintained since some year I could not guess, and passing an old cinder block powder house from a mine that had closed before I was born, and coming around a bend at the top and finding myself on Forest Road 19, which was still marked with a little brown Forest Service sign. I turned north. The sun was down. The sky was a dark blue with a thin band of orange at the horizon. I found the pull-off at Trail 17 at 7:45. There was a truck in it. It was a black GMC with West Virginia plates. There was a shape in the driver's seat. I pulled in behind the GMC, and I got out with the rifle, and I walked up along the driver's side. I could see Sam through the window. He was young. He was maybe 20. He had his father's dark hair and a round face and eyes that had been crying for a long time. He saw me, and he made a small choke sound, and he unlocked the door and he pushed it open, and he almost fell out of the truck. I caught him. I held him up. He was shaking. He smelled like sweat and creek water and old blood. He had a smear of blood on his sleeve. I said, "Where is your dad?" He said, "Down the trail, 1/2 mile." I said, "When did you last hear from him?" He said, 2 hours ago. He was on the handheld. He said he heard something outside the tent. I said, 2 hours ago. Sam nodded. He was crying. He said, I did not know what to do. I looked at the trail. The trail was a narrow footpath that ran back into the woods from the pull-off. There was a small brown sign at the head of it that said Trail 17. Beyond the sign, the trail went down into the trees, and the trees were dark now, the last of the light gone behind the ridges. I said, "Get in my truck. Take the rifle. If anything comes out of those trees that is not me, you shoot it. Do you understand?" Sam said, "I do not know how to shoot." I said, "You point it, and you pull the trigger, and you keep pulling until it stops. Get in the truck." I handed him the rifle. I took his handheld. I took the flashlight off my belt. I walked to the pull-off entrance, and I looked at the trail one more time. I did not have a plan. I had a job. I had a father down there who had been shot at by something and had been alone for 2 hours, and I had a son up here who had been crying in a locked truck. The two of them were more than I could carry out on my own, but the two of them were what I had. I stepped past the sign. I went down the trail. The trail dropped off the road into a stand of maples. It was narrow. Roots crossed it. My flashlight beam was a cone of yellow that lit up maybe 30 feet in front of me, and beyond that the forest was black. I moved fast because I did not want to think about moving. I moved with the handheld in one hand and the flashlight in the other, and my belt knife riding on my hip because that was the only weapon I had left. I had given Sam Halton the rifle. I had done that because there was one gun and there was one kid in a locked truck and one man on the trail, and the kid had a truck door and the man did not. And the calculation had been simple in the pull-off, and it did not feel simple now. I kept the light low. I did not sweep it around. I aimed it at the trail and I moved. At maybe a quarter mile in, I stopped. I stood on the trail and I listened. The forest was quiet, not silent. There were crickets, low and steady, and the occasional shift of a branch in a light wind, and the far-off honk of a heron down in the drainage. That was normal forest sound. That was reassuring. Whatever had come to my trailer had come with silence around it, the kind of silence that a large predator carries, because the small animals in 100 yards in every direction have shut up because they know it is there. I did not have that silence around me now. That meant the thing was not close, not right here. I let out a breath. I went on. At a half mile I saw the tent. The trail widened into a small flat area on the bank of a creek. The tent was in the flat area. It was a 2-person dome tent with an orange fly. The fly was still up. The tent was still zipped shut. There was a fire ring next to the tent. There was a pack propped against a log. Everything looked normal. Everything looked untouched. Except the tent was moving. Not a lot. A slow, steady shift of the fabric. The kind of movement that a body makes when it is breathing hard. I stopped on the trail maybe 20 feet from the tent. I put the flashlight beam on it. I said in the loudest voice I could manage without shouting, "Mr. Halton, this is Wes Corbett with Merritt. I am here for you. I am coming to the tent. Do you hear me?" The tent shifted. A voice came out of it. It was a man's voice. It was weak, but it was real. It said, "Come on, son. Come on." I moved forward. I got to the tent. I got on my knees. I set the flashlight down on the ground so it lit up the side of the tent. I unzipped the front zipper. I looked in. Halton the father was in the tent. He was a big man in his 50s. Thick shoulders, gray beard, a Blue Ridge midstream hat pushed back off his forehead. He was lying on a sleeping bag. His right side had been torn open. The wound went from just under his rib cage down to his hip, a long ragged slash that had opened the flannel of his shirt and gone into the meat under it. He had packed the wound with a bandage from his kit, and he had wrapped it as tight as he could with duct tape. The tape was soaked through. He had made a bad wound worse by walking on it. Or something had made it worse for him. I could not tell. His face was pale. His eyes were open. He was awake. He said, "Where is Sam?" I said, "He is in a truck up the road. He is fine." Halton closed his eyes for a second. He said, "Good. Thank Christ." I said, "Can you walk?" Halton said, "I can try." I got in the tent. I got my shoulder under his good arm. I got him up to a sitting position. He made a sound I do not want to describe. I got him to his knees. I got him to his feet. We stood there in the tent for maybe 15 seconds with him leaning on me. He was very heavy. He was heavier than me, and he was not the kind of heavy that a big man is when he is standing on his own legs. He was leaning most of his weight on me. I said, "We are going. Half a mile up to the road. You can do half a mile." He said, "I can do half a mile." I got him out of the tent. We started up the trail. We made maybe 50 yards. Then the smell came. I felt Halton go stiff against me. He said, in a voice that had gone thin, "It is coming back." I said, "How do you know?" He said, "I know." I said, "Which way?" He said, "Uphill." I looked at the flashlight beam. I swept it up the trail. There was nothing in the beam, but the smell was there, sulfur and meat, coming down at us on the light wind that ran down the drainage. The smell told me the wind was carrying it, and the wind was blowing down the trail, from where we were going toward where we had come from. That meant the thing was above us on the trail. That meant the thing was between us and the road. I said, "Can you go off the trail?" Halton said, I can go where you take me. We went off the trail. I turned right, downhill, away from the way we had been going, and I helped Halton onto the slope. It was steep. We could not run. We could barely walk. I had to hold him up and pick our line at the same time, and there were rocks and roots, and I was doing all of it by the light of a flashlight beam I had to keep low. Behind us, I heard the trail. I heard something come down it, slow, heavy, thump, scrape, thump, scrape. We got down to the creek. I put Halton against a big rock at the edge of the creek. I turned off the flashlight. We were in full dark. The moon was not up yet. I could not see anything. I could hear the creek, and I could hear Halton breathing shallow, and I could hear something up the slope above us at the trail, taking one heavy step at a time. The smell was very strong. I could feel it in my throat. The thing above us stopped. I could hear it up there. It was breathing. That slow, wet rhythm I had heard at the back of the trailer. In and out. In and out. It was maybe 40 yards up the slope at the point on the trail where we had gone off it, and it was standing there and it was smelling us in the dark. Halton was leaning against the rock. He put a hand on my arm. He squeezed. He did not speak. I did not speak. The thing on the trail huffed. That same low, interested sound. It took a step. It came off the trail. It was coming down the slope toward us. I do not know if this makes sense to anyone who was not there. But I understood, in the dark, at the creek, with Halton bleeding against a rock behind me, that the thing on the slope could see us and we could not see it. It could see us the way a coyote sees a rabbit at midnight. Something in its eyes. Something in its face. Whatever made it what it was, it did not need the light I did. I could feel it coming. I did the only thing I had. I picked up the biggest rock I could get one hand around. It was a chunk of sandstone about the size of a bowling ball. I stood up straight. I threw the rock as hard as I could up the slope, angled to the left of where I thought the thing was, into a thicket of laurel about 30 yards uphill. The rock hit the laurel with a heavy crash. Leaves broke. Branches broke. The sound was loud in the dark. The thing on the slope stopped. Then it moved. It moved toward the sound of the rock, up and to the left, away from us. Fast. Its footfalls were quick now. Not the slow thump scrape of the trailer visit, but a fast, heavy run through the leaves. It was going after the sound. It thought the sound was us. I grabbed Halton off the rock. I said, "Now." We went. I do not know how we went. I do not remember picking our line. I remember only that we crossed the creek, which was ankle deep, and we came up the slope on the other side, and we went along the far bank, upstream. We were going the wrong way from the truck. I knew it. I was doing it on purpose. Whatever the thing was, it had gone after the rock, which meant it thought we were up the slope to the left. If we went the other way, if we went upstream instead of back up to the road, we might get around it. Might. I did not know. I was making it up. Halton walked. I do not know how he walked. He was leaning on me, and he was hissing every few steps, and his breath was coming ragged, but he was walking. Some men are made of harder things than other men, and Halton was one of them. We went maybe half a mile up the creek. I stopped. I listened. I did not hear the thing. I did not hear anything but the creek. I said, "We are going up. We are going to hit the ridge. We are going to come around the head of the drainage to the road." Halton said, "All right." We went up. The climb took an hour. It might have been 2. I lost track. Halton fell twice. Both times he got up. I got him up. The second time he sat on a log for a minute, and he looked at me in the dark, and he said, "If I do not make it, tell Sam I am sorry I made him come out." I said, "You are going to make it." He said, "All right." I helped him up. We hit the ridge above the trail at maybe 11 at night. I could see the ridge because the moon had finally come up, a thin crescent that threw enough light to pick out the crest against the sky. From the ridge, I could see the pull-off. I could see my truck. I could see the little yellow rectangle of the parking lights on my truck, which meant Sam had turned them on. Smart kid. That was our beacon. We came down the ridge to the road. We came out onto the pavement of Forest Road 19, 100 yards north of the pull-off. I walked Halton down the road. Sam saw us in the parking lights and got out of the truck with the rifle up. I called out to him. He lowered the rifle. He ran to us. He got under his father's other arm. We got Halton into the passenger seat of my truck. Sam got into the back. I got behind the wheel. I turned the key. The truck started. We drove out of the forest. We took Forest Road 19 north to the paved road, and then we came down through Loudendale, and we passed the BP with its lights on and the young woman with the nose ring still at the register. I did not stop. We drove to the CAMC in Charleston. I called the number on the emergency intake sheet on the way in. The nurses met us at the door with a gurney. They took Halton straight into the trauma bay. The doctor on call closed the wound in his side. He lived. He is walking with a cane now. He does not do field work anymore. Sam sat in the waiting room next to me. His hands were on his knees. His eyes were wet. He did not talk for a long time. Then he said, "Did you see it?" I said, "No, I did not." Sam said, "My dad said it was white. He said it was tall. He said it stood up like a man. He said its face was long like a sheep. He said its eyes did not shine when he put the flashlight on them. Its eyes just took the light. He said its hands were wrong." I said, "He got a look at it." Sam said, "He got half a look. Then it was on him." I said, "He shot at it." Sam said, "He put 30-06 through it, and it went off into the trees. It did not go down." I sat there for a while. I said, "He is a lucky man." Sam said, "He said the same thing." I did not go back to the state forest. I called Merritt in the morning and I told my supervisor that I was done with the Blue Ridge midstream contract and that I would eat the last week of pay. He asked me why. I did not know how to tell him why. I said the site was unsafe. I said there was an animal problem. I said Halton the father had been hurt and I had gotten him and his son out and I was not going back in for the survey no matter what the invoice said. My supervisor was quiet for a long time on the phone. Then he said, "All right, Wes, I will send someone up to clear the trailer." He asked one more question. He asked, "You okay?" I said, "I am fine." He said, "All right," and hung up. Blue Ridge midstream shelved the western route 2 months later and rerouted the pipeline around the north end of the forest. The paperwork that came out of the shelving said that the western route was infeasible due to environmental sensitivity and community concern. It did not say anything else. I do not know who at Blue Ridge Midstream made that decision. I do not know if they read a report from Merritt or if they heard a rumor from somebody at the CAMC or if they just decided on their own that the western route was more trouble than it was worth. I have not asked. I still work for Merritt. I do not take West Virginia jobs anymore. I told my supervisor after the Halton contract that I would not work anywhere in the state, and he did not argue. I do North Carolina, and I do Georgia, and I do East Tennessee. I have a small apartment in Asheville now, and a 2-year-old lease on it, and my kid comes on weekends. I saw Delmar Witt one time after the trip. It was 2 months later, a Sunday morning, in the parking lot of a Cracker Barrel in Beckley. He was in a wheelchair. His wife was pushing him. He was thinner than he had been at the BP, but I knew him right away. He looked at me across the parking lot. I looked at him. His mouth moved, but no sound came out. His wife did not notice. She pushed him toward the truck they had come in. I did not walk over. I did not say anything. I sat in my own truck with my hands on the wheel, and I watched him get lifted into the passenger side, and I watched his wife fold the wheelchair, and I watched the truck pull out. His mouth had made a shape. I read it because his mouth had said it slow. It had been 3 words. Keep it lit. I keep a fire lit at my apartment every night. It is a little candle in a jar. It sits on the shelf next to the window. I light it at sundown. I blow it out in the morning. I have not missed a night since I came out of the forest. My daughter came for a visit the weekend after I moved into the apartment. She was 7 then. She saw the candle on the shelf, and she asked what it was for. I told her it was for reading. She said, "You do not read at night." I said, "I do sometimes." She looked at me for a long minute. Kids can tell when a grown-up is lying, but they do not always have the words to say so. She did not push it. That night, when I was tucking her in on the pull-out couch, she asked me if she could take the candle to bed with her. I told her no. I told her the candle had to stay on the shelf by the window because it was a special kind of candle. She said, "Special how?" I said, "Just special." She looked at the window for a while, and then she looked at me and she said, "Daddy, is there something outside?" I said, "No, baby, there is nothing outside." She said, "You would tell me, though." "Right." I said, "I would tell you." She said, "Okay." She turned over and she went to sleep. I sat with her until she was breathing steady. Then I got up and I went to the window and I looked out. The parking lot was empty. The candle flame was straight up. I stood there for a long time anyway. Some nights I wake up around 3 and I look at the candle. Some nights the flame is straight up and steady and I go back to sleep. Some nights the flame is leaning. It leans toward the window. There is no draft in the room. The window is closed. But the flame leans. On those nights I get up and I stand at the window and I look out at the parking lot and I do not see anything. But I can smell something. I can smell it faintly. Sulfur and meat. And on those nights I stay up until dawn. The gravel road ran out at my grandfather's mailbox and became a track of packed clay, and after that the track ran another quarter-mile up the holler and became my grandfather's front yard. I coasted the truck the last of the way with the engine off, because the yard had a slope to it and I did not want to shift into low gear at the top and skid on the wet clay and put my truck through the front porch of the cabin I had just inherited. I got the truck stopped with the parking brake, and I sat with my hands on the wheel, and I looked at the cabin through the windshield, and I did not get out for a while. My grandfather had built the cabin in 1962. It was a squared log 2-room house with a metal roof that had rusted to a soft red-brown color, and a stovepipe coming up out of the ridgeline, and a front porch that ran the width of the house on the downslope side. The porch had a swing on it. The swing was still hung on chains. It was not moving. The wind was not blowing. Behind the cabin, the ground climbed steep and thick with hardwood, and above the hardwood the ridge was gray with mist, because it was late afternoon, and the mist had come in early. The holler had a creek that ran along the north side of the yard. I could hear the creek from inside the truck with the windows up. I got out. I stood in the yard. The yard was maybe 20 feet across, and then it dropped off to the creek on one side and rose steep to the outhouse on the other, and beyond the outhouse rose steeper to the smokehouse, and beyond the smokehouse the woods took over. The whole property was about 11 acres. Most of that 11 acres was straight up. I said out loud, "All right, Grandpa." My voice sounded thin. "My name is Jesse Hollins. I was 29 that October. I had been driving a delivery truck for a lumber yard in Lexington for 4 years. My grandfather, Homer Hollins, had died in August in a hospital bed in Whitesburg of the cancer that had been eating him for 2 years. He had left me the cabin because my Uncle Roy had died in Ramadi in 2006, and my Aunt Lila had died of an aneurysm in 2014, and after them there was just me. My mother had left the mountains at 18 and had not come back for anything, not even his funeral, and she and my father were living in Florida now, and she had told me on the phone the day the lawyer called that she did not want the cabin, and she did not want anything in the cabin, and if I did not want it either, I should let it go back to the county for the taxes. I had thought about it for a week. Then I had called the lawyer, and I had said I wanted it. I did not want it because I wanted to live in Letcher County. I wanted it because my grandfather had built it with his own hands out of logs off his own land, and he had lived in it for 62 years. And he had died in it, if you counted the ambulance ride from the front porch as part of the dying. My mother had grown up in it. I had spent every summer in it until I was 12. when my mother stopped speaking to Homer over something I did not understand at the time and probably still do not. That cabin was the only house in my life that had ever felt like something I would come back to, and I had not come back in 17 years. I had come back now because he had died, and because I did not have anywhere else to be. I planned to stay 2 weeks. I had told the lumberyard I needed the time. I had told them I was cleaning out an inheritance. That was true. I was going to go through my grandfather's things and decide what I would keep and what I would give to the neighbors and what I would take to the dump. 2 weeks. Then back to Lexington. That was the plan. That was the whole plan. I did not come up the holler to prove anything. I did not come to look for anything. I came to sort through boxes and to walk the property and to say goodbye to a man I had loved and had not seen for 17 years. I got my duffel out of the truck. I got the key out of the envelope the lawyer had mailed me. I walked up onto the porch. The porch boards were solid. My grandfather had known how to lay a porch. I put the key in the front door, and I turned it, and the door opened on hinges that needed oil, and I stepped into the cabin. Inside it was cold. That was the first thing. The kind of cold a house gets when nobody has slept in it for 2 months. The air had a settled feeling. There was a smell of pipe tobacco and cedar and wood smoke and something underneath all three that I could not name at first, but that turned out, when I sat down on the couch to think about it, to be the smell of my grandfather, just his skin smell, still in the room. The front room had a wood stove on a slate hearth, a couch under the front window, a rocking chair by the stove, and a small table with 2 straight chairs against the far wall. The floor was pine planks worn smooth. There was a Bible on the table. There was a pipe on the hearth. There was a shotgun in a rack above the front door, an old 16-gauge that had been my great-grandfather's, and there was a box of shells on the shelf under the rack. Everything was where I remembered it from when I was 10. The back room was the bedroom. There was a bed with a quilt on it that my grandmother had made in the 50s, before she died and before my mother was old enough to remember her. There was a chest of drawers. There was a small window. There was a wardrobe. Everything smelled of cedar. My grandfather had kept cedar chips in every drawer and every chest of every piece of furniture in the house, all his life. The habit had come from his mother, who had kept a cedar chest in the bedroom of the house they had lived in before they moved to Letcher County. He had told me that once. I had forgotten. I remembered it now, standing in his bedroom, with my duffel on the floor, with the smell of cedar in the air. I was not going to cry. I did not want to cry. I stood there and I did not cry. I got the duffel up on the bed. I unpacked. I sat down on the bed. I looked out the small window at the ridge behind the house. I sat there for a while. I lit the wood stove around 4 in the afternoon. There was kindling in the box next to it, and split hardwood on the porch, and the stove drew clean the moment I got the fire started. My grandfather had known how to build a chimney, too. I put a pot of water on for coffee. I sat in the rocking chair by the stove. I picked up the Bible on the table. The Bible was a King James. It was black leather. It had been in the family since somewhere around 1890, according to the family tree that had been written in on the flyleaf in 3 different hands. The last name in the tree was mine. My grandfather had put it there. I flipped through the Bible. Some of the pages had been torn out. I did not notice at first. I turned to Genesis, out of habit, because that is what a person does when they open a Bible for the first time in years. Genesis was intact. I flipped forward. Exodus was intact. I flipped forward. Somewhere in the middle of Kings, there was a gap. A whole chapter of 2 Kings had been torn out. Not cut. Torn. The paper had been ripped along the binding, and the tear was ragged and old. I looked at the edge of the tear. It was not fresh. It was not from this year. The paper had yellowed along the tear line. Whatever had happened to the pages had happened a long time ago. I flipped forward. There were more gaps. Ecclesiastes was missing entirely. Job was mostly intact, but the last 4 chapters were gone. Isaiah had pages missing throughout, but not consecutively. Someone had gone through the Bible and taken specific chapters out and left others alone. I did not know the Bible well enough to see the pattern. I did know that the pages that were missing were pages that talked about certain things, pages about the dead, pages about visions, pages about being still and listening for the voice of God and the wind and the fire and the quiet. Somebody had gone through the book and had torn out most of the pages that dealt with the ways a person hears what they should not hear, and had left the rest. I closed the Bible. I set it back on the table. I do not remember what I thought about it. I remember picking it up and I remember putting it down. Between those two things, there is a soft blank spot in my memory. I know I did not think something is wrong with this Bible, because if I had thought that, I would have looked up the passages that were missing, and I would have thought about what they had in common, and I would have made the connection sooner. I did not do any of that. I put the Bible down, and I got up and I made coffee, and I sat on the porch and I drank the coffee, and I watched the light go pink on the ridge. That is when the neighbors came up the road. There were two of them, a man and a woman. They walked up the road side by side, not touching but close together, and they walked at the pace of people who had been walking together for a long time. The man had a beard that was mostly white with a little dark still left in it, and he was wearing overalls and a canvas jacket. The woman was a little shorter. She had her hair pulled back in a scarf, and she was wearing a long skirt over pants and a wool coat. They both looked to be about 70. They were coming up the holler from the direction of the paved road, which meant they lived somewhere between me and the paved road, which meant they were my nearest neighbors. I stood up when I saw them. I set the coffee on the porch rail. They came up the yard. They stopped at the bottom of the steps. The man looked at me for a moment without speaking. Then he took his hat off. He said, "You would be Homer's grandson." I said, "Yes, sir." "Jesse." He said, "I am Wendell Fields. This is my wife, Nellie. We live down at the mouth of the holler, where the pavement runs out." I said, "Pleased to meet you both." Nellie said, "We are sorry for your loss, Jesse. Homer was a good man." I said, "Thank you." Wendell said, "We heard your truck come up the road. We wanted to come pay respects." I said, "Come on up on the porch. I have coffee." They came up. I brought 2 more mugs out of the kitchen, and Nellie sat in the rocking chair, and Wendell sat on the porch swing, and I sat on the top step. We drank the coffee. Wendell asked me about the drive from Lexington. I told him about it. Nellie asked me about my mother. I told her my mother was doing well in Florida. Nellie did not push it. There was a thing in her not pushing that I understood. She had known my mother when my mother was a girl. We sat like that for maybe 20 minutes. Then Wendell said, "Jesse, there are some things about this holler you probably ought to know." I looked at him. He said, "I am not going to explain them. I could not explain them if I tried. But there are 5 things, and if you can keep them for as long as you are here, you will not have any trouble, and when you go back down to Lexington, you will not carry anything with you that you did not bring up." Nellie was looking at her coffee. She did not look up. I said, "All right." Wendell said, 1. Be inside by full dark, not sundown, full dark, when you cannot see the tops of the trees anymore, when you cannot pick your dog out of a shadow in the yard. Be inside then. Every night. No exceptions. He said, 2. Do not whistle after sundown, on the porch, in the yard, especially not in the woods. If you catch yourself doing it, stop. He said, 3. If you hear a voice outside at night that sounds like somebody you know, do not answer it, and do not open the door, and do not look out the window. If it says your name, do not answer. If it says your mother's name, do not answer. If it says my name, or Nellie's name, do not answer, especially if it is one of us. He said, 4. If there is a thunderstorm at night, do not look at the ridgeline, not through the window, not from the porch, not from the yard, not for any reason. The lightning shows things on that ridge that you do not want to see, and if you see them, they see you back. He said, 5. On every 3rd night, put a bowl of milk out on the flat stump behind the smokehouse. Just a saucer of milk. It does not have to be a big saucer. It does not have to be fresh milk. Any milk will do. You do not have to see who takes it. In the morning the bowl will be empty, and the milk will be gone. Just do it. Homer did it every third night for 60 years. He did it the night before he went to Whitesburg. There is milk in the icebox now. I put it there yesterday. Wendell looked at me. He said, "Those are the 5 things. If any of them sound strange to you, that is because they are strange. I do not blame you for how they sound. I am telling them to you because Homer would have wanted me to. Homer would have wanted somebody to sit with you on this porch on your first night and tell you the 5 things, and there is nobody else left to do it, so it is me." I sat on the step, and I looked at him. I do not know what I would have done if I had been sitting there alone, or if it had been my grandfather himself telling me the 5 things, or if I had been 15 years old and easy to scare. I might have laughed. I might have argued. I might have said, "Wendell, you are having some fun with a city kid." I did not do any of that, because Wendell Fields was 70 years old, and he had walked up my grandfather's holler with his wife on a Sunday afternoon in October to tell me 5 things, and he had taken his hat off to say hello, and Nellie had not looked up from her coffee the whole time he had been talking, and there was something in the two of them, in their carefulness with me, in the way they had come up together, that made me understand that this was not a joke, and that they had not come to have fun with me. They had come because they had promised my grandfather they would, and they had come, both of them together, so that neither one of them would have to walk down the holler alone at dusk. I said, "All right, Mr. Fields, I will do the 5 things." He said, "Just Wendell." I said, "All right, Wendell, I will do the 5 things." He said, "Thank you." They finished their coffee. They set the mugs on the porch rail. Wendell put his hat back on. He and Nellie walked down the steps together, and down the yard, and out onto the road, and they walked back down the holler side by side. They did not look back. The sun had gone behind the ridge to the west, while we had been sitting, and the light was going. I watched them walk down the road until they were out of sight around the bend. Then I stood up, and I gathered the mugs, and I went inside, and I closed the door. I made supper on the wood stove, beans and cornbread from a mix and coffee. I ate at the small table with the Bible pushed to the far side. I did not open the Bible again. I took my time with the food. When I was done, I washed the plate and the pot and the deep sink in the kitchen with water from the cistern pump, because Homer had not had running water hooked up to the house, and I had not paid to have anybody come out and hook it up. I would fetch a jug from the creek in the morning for drinking. The cistern was for washing. It had been raining in Letcher County for the past 3 days, and the cistern was near full. When I had washed the dishes and put them in the drying rack, I got the saucer out of the cupboard, and I got the milk out of the icebox. The icebox was a Kelvinator from probably 1955 that ran on propane. It worked fine. The milk was a quart carton, a store brand, and it had a sell-by date almost a week out. Wendell had put it there yesterday. I poured about a quarter cup into the saucer. I put the carton back. I took the saucer out the back door, and I walked around the smokehouse, and I found the flat stump. The stump was the base of what had once been a hickory. It had been cut off about 2 feet above the ground, and the top had been plain flat. It was smooth from long use. I set the saucer on the stump. I stepped back. I stood there for a minute in the dim gray light of the yard. I did not know what I was doing. I knew that. But I had said I would do it. I stood there, and I said, out loud, softly, "This is for whoever it is." My grandpa said to leave it. So I am leaving it. I did not know why I had spoken. It seemed like the thing to do. I went back inside. I closed the back door. I slid the little wooden bolt across, the same kind of bolt my grandfather had put on every door of the cabin, because he had not trusted metal locks. The wooden bolt was cut from oak. It was worn smooth by 60 years of his hand. I went into the front room. I set up the couch as a bed because I did not want to sleep in my grandfather's bed on the first night. I got the shotgun down off the rack. I looked at it. I checked the chamber. It was not loaded. I loaded 2 shells from the box on the shelf, and I broke the action closed, and I set the shotgun on the floor beside the couch. Then I lay down under a blanket that had been folded over the arm of the couch, and I looked at the ceiling for a while, and I listened. The creek was loud on that side of the house. Otherwise, the holler was quiet. I did not hear a car. I did not hear a dog. Wendell and Nellie lived 1.5 miles down the road. Nothing else was up the holler behind me. I was the last house on the road. Around midnight, I heard something in the yard. It walked. That is the only word for it. Something was walking in the yard, not on the porch, in the front yard, on the grass, between the porch and the truck. Its footfalls were light and quick, and there were 4 of them, and then they stopped, and then there were 4 more, and then they stopped. I lay on the couch with my hand on the shotgun, and I did not move. The footfalls moved once around the truck. They came back to the porch. They stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. They did not come up the steps. There was a long silence. Then the footfalls went back across the yard and around the smokehouse and toward the flat stump behind it, and then they were too far away for me to hear. I lay on the couch for a long time. My hand was on the shotgun. I did not sleep for a while. When I did sleep, it was a shallow sleep, and I dreamed of my grandfather sitting in the rocking chair by the wood stove reading a newspaper and pretending not to know I was there. He had done that when I was a boy. He had done it to teach me patience. I had not learned patience, but I had learned to sit still. In the morning, I got up early. The stove had gone out. I built it up again. I went out on the porch. I looked at the yard. There was dew on the grass. There were tracks in the dew. Small tracks, deer size, 4-hoof feet, going in a slow curved line from the tree line on the north side of the yard, around the truck, up to the base of the porch steps, and back across the yard and around the smokehouse. I walked out around the smokehouse. The saucer was on the stump. It was empty. I stood there for a long time. Then I picked up the saucer. I took it back inside. I did not know what to do with what I had just seen. I told myself that deer come out at night, and deer will investigate a house, and deer may drink milk out of a saucer if the milk is left out. That was possible. That was even likely if you did not think about the fact that no wild deer in eastern Kentucky was going to walk right up to the base of a porch step where a man had been sleeping and stand there and then leave. Deer do not do that. Deer stay in the tree line. But I told myself it had been a deer. I washed the saucer. I put it back in the cupboard. I made coffee. At about 9 in the morning, I walked down the holler to Wendell and Nellie's. I did not have a reason. I had a feeling that I wanted to see them again in the daylight. Their house was on the paved road, on the flat where the holler opened out. It was a small white frame house with a metal roof and a covered porch and a swing on the porch. Wendell was in the yard raking leaves. Nellie was hanging wash on a line. They looked up when I came around the bend. Wendell said, "Morning, Jesse." I said, "Morning." He leaned on the rake. He looked at me. He said, "Did you sleep?" I said, "Some." There was something in the yard last night. Wendell said, "What did it sound like?" I said, 4 feet, deer-sized. It walked around the truck and up to the porch, and then went around the smokehouse to the stump. Wendell nodded once. He said, "All right, good. That means it took the milk. It is happy." I said, "What is it?" He said, "I do not know what it is. I know that it has come to that stump for as long as your grandfather lived up there, and I know that it comes light and it goes light, and if you keep leaving the milk, it will not come up on the porch. That is all I know." I said, "Wendell?" He said, "Yes." I said, "What did you mean about the ridge?" He looked at me for a while. Nellie had stopped hanging the wash. She was standing at the line with a wet shirt in her hands. Wendell said, "I meant what I said. In a storm, do not look at the ridge." I said, "Why?" Wendell said, "Because I have looked one time when I was younger than you. I did not know the rules then. Homer had not told me. Nobody had told me. There was a storm on a July night. I was outside taking my father's laundry off the line because the storm came fast and the laundry was still wet on the line, and I did not want to lose it. I was in the yard. The lightning was heavy. I looked up at the ridge because a bolt hit close, and I looked to see what it hit. I looked at the ridge in the lightning. I saw what was there. I said, "What was there?" Wendell said, "I am not going to tell you." He said it flat. He said it without meanness. He said it the way a man says a thing when he has thought about a question for 50 years and has decided the only right answer is the one he is giving. He said, "You do not want to know. You do not want to have to hold that. You want to know why you do not look at the ridge, and I have told you why. That is enough." "Nellie," said Wendell. Wendell said, he asked. Nellie said, "He does not need to know." Wendell said, "He is going to ask again." I stood in their yard with my hands in my jacket pockets, and I felt like a boy of 12 asking a question his parents had already decided he was too young for. I said, "All right, I will not look." Wendell said, "Good." Nellie went back to hanging the wash. Wendell went back to raking leaves. I stood in the yard for another minute. Then I said, "Thank you," and I walked back up the holler. That was the second day. The second night was quiet. I put out the milk because I had decided that whatever rules Wendell had given me, I was going to keep, even the ones that did not have a night attached to them yet. I did not know when the third night was. I did not know when to count from. So I decided I would put out milk every night for 2 weeks. I could afford the milk. The second night, nothing came in the yard. I slept a full sleep on the couch. The shotgun was on the floor beside me. I did not need it. The third day, I started the actual work I had come up the holler to do. I opened the wardrobe in the back room. My grandfather's clothes were still hanging in it. 2 flannel shirts, a pair of work pants, a church suit that he had probably not worn in 10 years, a hat on the top shelf, a shoebox on the shelf next to the hat. I took the shoebox down. I sat on the edge of the bed with it. I opened it. The box had letters in it. Some were from my grandmother, dated in the 50s, before they were married. Some were from my Uncle Roy, dated in 2005, from Iraq. Some were from my mother, dated at the top in the 80s, when she was in college. My mother had written to her father when she was in college. I had not known that. I turned one of her letters over, and I read the first line, and it began, "Daddy." And I put the letter back in the box, because I did not have any business reading the mail my mother had sent her father when she was 19 years old, and still willing to call him Daddy. Underneath the letters, at the bottom of the box, there was a photograph. The photograph was old. It was a black and white 5x7. It had a scalloped edge, the kind of edge that photographs used to have when they came back from the drugstore printers in the 40s and 50s. The photograph showed my grandfather when he was young, maybe 20, standing on the front porch of a cabin that was probably this cabin, although the porch swing had not been there yet. He was thin. He had his hair combed back. He was smiling. There was another man on the porch with him. The other man was older. He was maybe 40. He had a beard. He was not smiling. He was standing with his back against the door of the cabin, and he had his arms crossed over his chest, and he was looking not at the camera, but off to the left, up at something that must have been the ridge. The other man was tall. The other man had a strange stillness about him. The other man was in the photograph, but he was not part of the photograph. He was in it the way a shadow is in a photograph. He was in it because he happened to be in that place at that moment, but he was not there for the picture. I looked at the photograph for a long time. Something about the other man made my mouth go dry. I did not know why. I turned the photograph over. On the back, in pencil, in my grandmother's handwriting, was written, "Homer and the Tall Man, Home Place, 1947. That was all. I put the photograph back in the box. I closed the box. I put it back on the shelf. I closed the wardrobe. I did not do any more sorting that day. That night, I put the milk out. The third night, or fourth, if you counted from the night before I got there, when Wendell had put the milk in the icebox. I did not know which count was right. I put it out anyway. Around 11 at night, I was on the couch reading a paperback Western I had brought from Lexington when I heard the voice. It came from the front yard. It was not close. It was maybe 20 yards from the porch. It was a woman's voice. It was middle-aged. It was tired. It said, "Jesse, I froze on the couch. I stopped breathing. It said, "Jesse, honey, it is Mom." I did not move. The paperback was open on my chest. My finger was between the pages where I had been holding my place. I did not move my finger. The voice said, "Jesse, come out here. It is Mom. I drove all night. I am sorry I did not tell you I was coming." The voice was my mother's voice. It was exact. It had her cadence. It had that little upward lilt at the end of a sentence that she got when she was trying to be soft with me. It had the version of her voice that she used only for me, that she had never used with my father or with her sisters or with anyone else. It was a voice I had heard my whole life. I lay on the couch and I did not answer. The voice said, "Jesse, please. It is cold out here. Let me in." I did not answer. The voice said, "Jesse, why are you not answering me? It is Mom. Answer me." I closed my eyes. I bit down on the inside of my lip until I could taste blood. I did not move. The voice said my name 11 more times. I counted. Then it stopped. There was a long silence. Then I heard something walk across the yard, from where the voice had been, up the yard, past the porch, around the smokehouse, to the stump. Its footfalls were light, not four-legged this time, two-legged, but light, very light. The saucer clinked on the stump. Then the footfalls went back across the yard, down the yard, around the truck, and out onto the road and down the holler. I lay on the couch for a long time. I did not sleep at all that night. In the morning I went out to check the stump. The saucer was empty. There was no dew that night, so there were no tracks. I sat on the porch. I made coffee. I drank it. My hands would not stop shaking. Around noon I walked down the holler to Wendell's. Wendell was on his porch. Nellie was in the kitchen. I sat on the porch swing next to Wendell. He did not ask me anything. He waited. I said, "It came last night," in my mother's voice. Wendell nodded. He did not seem surprised. He said, "You did not answer." I said, "No." He said, "Good." I said, "Wendell, why my mother?" He said, "Because your mother is not here. It mostly does not use somebody in this holler, because you would catch the wrongness in the voice before you knew you had caught it. It goes for somebody far off, when it can, somebody you have not seen in a while. It picks the voice that is easiest for you to believe." I said, "How does it know her voice?" He said, "I do not know. I have never known." I said, "Do you think it took the shape of her too, like out there in the yard? Was it standing in her shape?" Wendell looked at me. He said, "You did not look out the window, did you?" I said, "No." He said, "Good." I sat on the porch swing next to him for a while. Then I said, "When is the storm coming?" He said, "Tomorrow night. It has been building. I heard on the radio." I said, "All right." I walked back up the holler. I spent most of the fourth day inside. I closed the shutters on the north window of the front room and the small window in the bedroom. I closed them because they faced the ridge behind the cabin, and I had decided that if I could not look at the ridge during the storm, I would remove the temptation to try. The shutters were made of oak, hinged inside the frame. They had been on the cabin since it was built. I had never seen them closed as a boy. They closed clean. The wooden hooks that held them shut still worked. I closed the north window shutter in the front room and the small bedroom window shutter, and I latched both. That left only the south window in the front room open. The south window faced the road. It did not face the ridge. I brought in extra wood for the stove. I filled the wood box on the porch, and I brought a second armload in and put it against the wall by the stove. I filled a 5-gallon jug at the creek, and I brought it in and set it by the sink. I ate a lunch of ham sandwiches and canned peaches, and I stood on the porch afterward, and I looked at the sky. The sky was still clear at noon, but there was a green edge along the western horizon that I had learned to recognize in Kentucky. That green edge means a system is coming in. It usually means it is coming fast. I had a couple of hours. Around 3 in the afternoon, the clouds came over the ridge. They came fast. The wind picked up. The temperature dropped. I could smell rain in the air, that clean metal smell that thunderstorms carry. I went inside and closed the front door. I did not latch the shutter on the south window. I wanted to see the yard. The rain started at 4. It came in slow at first. Big drops that hit the metal roof one at a time and rang like coins on a plate. Then it came harder. Then it came in sheets. The lightning started at 6. It was still light out when the first bolt hit. I was in the rocking chair by the stove with the paperback Western closed on my lap because I could not read anymore. I heard the crack, and I felt the house shake, and I did not look at the south window. I sat in the rocking chair, and I looked at the stove. The lightning kept coming. There is a certain kind of Kentucky mountain thunderstorm that seats itself over a holler and does not move. It circles. It hits again and again in the same place. The lightning stayed over my grandfather's holler for the whole evening. It hit the ridge behind the house 6 times in the first hour. Each time I could see the flash through the closed shutters as a bright line around the edges. Each time the thunder came right on top of the flash. That meant the strike was very close. The lightning was on the ridge. Every strike was on the ridge. Not on the yard, not on the road, not on the woods across the creek. On the ridge. That should have told me something. It did not tell me anything at the time. I was in the rocking chair by the stove, and I was trying not to think. At about 9 at night, the power in my head that had been holding steady all day started to slip. Not fast, slow. I started to think about the ridge. I started to think, what is up there? I started to think, Wendell has looked and he lived. Wendell would not tell me because Wendell thought I could not take it. Wendell was 70 years old. If Wendell could take it at 20, I can take it at 29. And then I thought, stop it. And then I thought, just once, just for a second, just to know what he saw. I got up. I sat down. I got up again. I walked in a small circle around the rocking chair. I sat down. Kentuckians will tell you that curiosity is not a virtue in a place like this. My grandfather had said that to me once when I was 10 and I had asked him what was in the smokehouse. He had said, "Grandson, some things it is enough to know are there. The wanting to know is not the same as the needing to know." He had not opened the smokehouse for me. I had gone in it that afternoon by myself, when he had gone into town for a package of nails, and there had been nothing in it but shelves of dried apples and a bag of salt and a curing ham. I had come out feeling like a boy who had cheated on a test he had already been going to pass. I had never told him I had opened the smokehouse. He had died without knowing. Now I was sitting in his front room in a thunderstorm, and I was thinking about opening the shutter on the north window of the front room to look at the ridge. I got up. I told myself I was going to check the stove. I opened the stove door. The fire was fine. I closed it. I looked at the north window. The shutter was closed. The wooden hooks were latched. Around the edges of the shutter I could see a thin, bright line every time the lightning hit. I stepped closer to the window. I do not know what made me do it. I have thought about it many times. I do not think it was anything Wendell had said. I do not think it was even my own curiosity at that moment. I think something was calling me to the window. It was not a voice. It was not anything I could point at. It was a pull. It was the pull that a river has when you stand on a bridge and you look down at the water, that little thin thought that goes, what if I jumped? Most people have that thought. Most people do not jump. The pull to the window that night was that kind of pull. It was mine. It was in me. But it had been put in me from somewhere else. I stepped closer to the window. I put my hand on the wooden hook of the shutter. I told myself, just 1 second. I told myself, just crack it. I told myself, you do not have to open it wide, just to crack, just to see what the ridge looks like in the lightning, just to know what Wendell knows. I opened the shutter. Not wide, 2 inches, just enough to see out the window. The lightning hit at the same moment. It was as if the ridge had been waiting. On the ridge, in the lightning, there were figures. They were not people. They were shaped roughly like people. They were tall. They stood along the crest of the ridge in a line. There were maybe 40 of them. They stood shoulder to shoulder, spaced evenly, in a line that ran along the whole visible length of the ridge crest, in both directions, out past where the ridge disappeared into rain, and back the other way past where it disappeared into rain. They stood facing the cabin. They were black, not black like a shadow, black like a hole in the world. The lightning did not reflect off them. It went into them. Where the figures were, the light did not travel. They were shaped like tall, thin men with long arms and small round heads, and they had no features that I could see. They stood in a line, and they did not move. The lightning lasted maybe a second and a half. That was long enough. I saw them. The lightning went out. The ridge went black. Thunder shook the cabin. I stood at the window with my hand on the shutter. My hand was frozen there. I could not close the shutter. I could not lift my hand. The lightning came again. The figures were closer. Not much closer. They had moved. They were maybe 10 yards down the slope from where they had been. They were still in a line. They were still facing the cabin. They were still spaced evenly. The nearest ones were now maybe 200 yards up the slope from my back door. The lightning went out. I could not move. My hand was on the shutter. My mouth was open. I could feel my heart trying to leave my body. The lightning came again. They were closer, maybe 50 yards closer. They were now at the tree line. They were now standing at the edge of the trees along the north side of the yard. The nearest one was maybe 70 yards from the cabin. It was tall. Its head was small. Its arms hung at its sides. I do not remember closing the shutter. I remember slamming it. I remember jamming the wooden hook so hard I broke the hook. I remember stepping back from the window and falling over the rocking chair and hitting the floor. I lay on the floor for a long time. The lightning kept coming. The thunder kept shaking. I could not move. My arms were pinned by whatever was in me. The paperback had fallen off the rocking chair, and it was on the floor next to me, and I looked at it, and I read the title, and I read the author, and I read the price on the top corner, because I could not do anything else with my eyes, and I could not close them. The storm went for another hour. The lightning did not stop hitting the ridge. Each hit felt closer. Each hit felt like it was reaching down into the yard and taking something. I lay on the floor, and I did not look at the window, and I did not look at the shutter, and I did not think. Around 10:30, the storm moved off. The rain slowed. The lightning got less frequent. The thunder got farther away. I sat up. My back hurt from lying on the plank floor. My hands were cold. I looked at the north window. The shutter was closed. The wooden hook was broken. It was still on the shutter, but the hook itself was snapped and hanging by one screw. I could not fix it that night. I got up. I walked to the south window, and I looked out at the yard. The yard was full of water. The truck was where I had left it. The road was a stream. There was no one in the yard. There was no one on the porch. There was no one at the tree line. I looked past the yard, up the slope, toward the ridge. The ridge was gone, in the rain and the dark. I could not see it. I could not have seen the figures, even if they had been there. I stood at the south window for a long time. Then I sat down on the couch. I put the shotgun on my lap. I did not sleep for the rest of the night. I did not go to sleep at all. I sat on the couch with the shotgun, and I watched the front door, and I watched the south window, and I watched the closed shutter on the north window, and I waited. Nothing came to the door. Nothing came in the yard. Nothing walked around the smokehouse. The saucer of milk was still on the stump, I thought. I had not put out fresh milk that night because it had not been the third night by my count, or the sixth, or however I was supposed to count. I did not know if the stump was going to hold. I did not know if what took the milk was going to come tonight, looking for milk that was not there, and finding milk that was not there, going to come up onto the porch to knock on the door. I sat on the couch. I did not think about the ridge. I did not let myself think about the ridge. I made my mind be an empty white room. I have never been able to meditate in my life. That night I meditated. I did not have a choice. At about 4 a.m, I heard a foot on the porch step. I did not move. The foot stayed on the step. It did not come further. It just stood there. I could hear the boards of the porch settle a little under weight. A voice came through the door. It was Wendell's voice. It said, "Jesse, it is me. Are you all right in there?" I did not answer. The voice said, "Jesse, answer me." I did not answer. The voice said, "Jesse, it is Wendell. I came up in the storm to check on you. Answer me." I could feel my throat working. I could feel my mouth wanting to say Wendell's name. I bit down on the inside of my lip again. I had cut the same place the night before. It started to bleed again. I tasted the blood. The voice said, "Jesse." Then there was a pause. The pause was too long. Wendell would not have paused that long. Wendell would have knocked. Wendell would have said, "Jesse, for Christ's sake, open the door." The voice on the porch said, "Jesse, come look at the ridge. It is beautiful." I closed my eyes. The voice said, "Jesse, come out. Come look. I want to show you." I did not move. The foot stayed on the step for a long time. Then it stepped back. Then it turned. Then it walked down off the porch and across the yard in a slow, steady pace, 4 steps, 5, 6, 7, and then it was too far for me to hear. I sat on the couch. I bled into my mouth. I watched the door. Dawn came slow. The rain stopped around 6. The light came gray and thin through the south window. When there was enough light to see the yard, I stood up, and I walked to the window, and I looked out. The yard was empty. The road was a running creek, but it was falling. The truck was where I had left it. There were footprints in the mud between the porch step and the road. 2 footprints going and 2 footprints coming back, barefoot, long, thin feet. The prints were much longer than a man's foot. The toes were long. There were 4 toes on each foot. I stood at the window and I looked at the footprints. Then I sat down on the couch again. Around 8 a.m, heard a truck coming up the road. It was a real truck. It was Wendell's truck. He pulled into the yard. He got out. He walked up onto the porch. He knocked on the door in his own way, which was 3 quick knocks, and a pause, and 1 more knock. It was the knock my grandfather had used, and I found out later that Wendell had learned it from him. I opened the door. Wendell looked at me. He looked at my face for a long time. He said, "You looked, didn't you?" I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "All right, let me in." He came in. He closed the door behind him. He walked to the stove, and he opened the door, and he built up the fire. He did it without asking. He was very quiet. He got the coffee pot down, and he made coffee. He did all of it without saying anything. When the coffee was made, he brought 2 mugs over to the table, and he sat down. I sat down across from him. The Bible was between us. He looked at the Bible. He turned it around so it was facing him. He opened it. He flipped through it. He found the place where Ecclesiastes should have been. He touched the ragged edge where the pages had been torn out. He nodded to himself. He closed the Bible. He said, "Homer tore those pages out in 1967. He did it after the second time he looked at the ridge. He did it because he could not read them anymore without being called back to the window. He tore out the pages in the Bible that reminded him of the ridge. He kept the rest. He said God did not mind. God knew why." I said, "Wendell." He said, "Yes." I said, "Am I going to be all right?" He looked at me across the table. He looked at me for a long time. He said, "You are going to hear it call you sometimes for the rest of your life. Not every night, not every year, but sometimes, in storms, mostly, sometimes on quiet nights. It will call you in voices you know. When it calls you, you do not answer. That is the whole thing. That is the only thing you have to do for the rest of your life. Do not answer." He said, "Homer did not answer for 57 years. Not one time. Not even at the end, in the hospital in Whitesburg when he was on the morphine and did not know his own name. I was there. I sat with him for the last 3 days. He never once answered. I think that is why he got to die like he did, in a bed, with people. I said, "All right." Wendell said, "You want to know something else?" I said, "All right." He said, "Your mother knows. She has always known. That is why she left. That is why she stayed gone. That is why she did not want you to come up here. She was not ashamed of him. She was afraid for you. She thought if you came up, you would look. She thought you would not be strong enough not to look. She has been carrying that fear for 20 years. I sat at the table. My coffee was in front of me. I had not drunk any of it. I said, "She was right about the looking." Wendell said, "She was." I said, "But I did not answer when I called last night in your voice. And I did not answer when I called on the third night in her voice." Wendell said, "Then she was wrong about the other part." He got up. He put his mug in the sink. He said, "I will come up tomorrow with a piece of oak. We will fix that shutter hook. You cannot leave it broken. Every night for as long as you keep this cabin, that shutter has to close. Do you hear me? Every night, even when you are back in Lexington and you come up on weekends. You will pay a man to come check that shutter for you when you are gone. You will pay Nellie and me if you cannot find anybody else. That shutter closes at dark every night, forever. Do you hear me?" I said, "I hear you." He went to the door. He put his hat on. He turned back. He said, "Homer would have been proud of you last night. That is a thing I can tell you. He would have been proud." He went out. His truck started up. He drove down the holler. I sat at the table for a long time. Then I finished the coffee. I did not sort through much of my grandfather's things after that morning. I did not have the heart for it. Wendell came back the next day with a piece of oak and a chisel and a small hand plane, and he showed me how to cut a new hook to replace the one I had broken. He fitted it. He mortised it into the shutter frame. He worked without talking. Nellie came up with him, and she sat on the porch swing with a bag of green beans, and she snapped beans while Wendell worked. When the hook was set, she came inside, and she looked at me, and she said, "You come down to us for supper. Do not sit up here by yourself tonight." I went down to their house. I ate a supper of green beans and cornbread and pork chops, and I sat on the porch afterward with Wendell while the light went. He did not tell me anything I did not already know. He asked me about Lexington. He asked me about the lumber yard. He asked me if I had a girl. I said I did not. He asked me if I was going to find one. I said I hoped so. He said, "You should. A man does better with somebody at the end of the day." I drove back up the holler at 9. I closed the shutter on the north window, and I hooked it with a new oak hook that Wendell had made. I sat on the couch. Nothing came in the yard. I stayed the rest of the 2 weeks. I got through my grandfather's things at half the pace I had planned to get through them. I kept most of what I found. I gave the church suit to Wendell because it fit him and my grandfather would have wanted him to have it. I gave 2 of the quilts to Nellie for the same reason. I took the shotgun and the Bible and the shoebox of letters and my grandmother's rocking chair down to Lexington in the truck when I went. I closed up the cabin. I set the wooden bolts on all the doors. I closed all the shutters. I hooked all the hooks. I paid Wendell and Nellie $200 in an envelope on the last day, and I told them what it was for. Wendell tried to give it back. I told him he could give it back to me by driving up every night at dark and checking every shutter for the rest of his life, or until he could not do it anymore, and in that case Nellie could do it, and after Nellie somebody else, and I would keep sending money as long as I owned the cabin. He looked at me. He said, "All right, Jesse." Nellie did not say anything. She had her hand on his arm. I drove down to Lexington on a Sunday. I got back to my apartment at 8 in the evening. I unloaded the truck. I put the shotgun on the shelf above the closet in the bedroom. I put the Bible on the nightstand. I put the shoebox in the drawer of the nightstand. I put my grandmother's rocking chair by the window in the living room. I called my mother that night. I told her I had come back down. I told her the cabin was closed up. I did not tell her about the ridge. I did not tell her about the voices. I did not tell her that I now understood why she had left. She was quiet on the phone for a while. Then she said, "Jesse." I said, "Yes, Ma." She said, "You did not look, did you?" I did not answer her right away. I did not know how to answer her. I did not want to lie to my mother. I did not want to tell her the truth. I said, "I did what Wendell told me to do." She was quiet again. Then she said, "All right." She said, "I am glad you got back down." We talked for another few minutes about nothing. She asked about the drive. I told her about the drive. She said she loved me. I told her I loved her too. We hung up. I sat in the apartment for a while. I made coffee. I drank it. Around 10:30 I turned off the lights, and I got in bed. Around 3 in the morning I heard something. It came from the window in the living room. Not on the window, near the window, outside maybe, or maybe on the far side of the wall. I could not tell. It was not a knock. It was a voice. The voice said, "Jesse." I was already awake. I do not know when I had woken up. I was on my back in the bed with my eyes open, and I was looking at the ceiling. The voice said, "Jesse, it is Grandpa. Come out to the front room." The voice was my grandfather's. It was exact. It had the deep, slow gravel it had gotten in the last 2 years of his life when the cancer had been in him. It had the little wet catch at the back of the throat that I had heard when I called him on the phone that last summer, 3 weeks before he had gone into the hospital. It was him. It was every note of him. The voice said, "Jesse, come on out here. I want to see how you are doing." I lay in the bed. I did not move. I did not answer. The voice said, "Jesse, you did good up there. You did real good. Come out here. Let me look at you." I closed my eyes. I bit down on the inside of my lip. The cut from that night at the cabin had healed. I opened a new one. The voice said my name 8 more times. I counted. Then it stopped. There was a long silence in the apartment. The refrigerator hummed. The radiator ticked. A car went by out on the street. I lay in the bed for a long time. I did not answer. I have not answered. I keep the shutters closed at my grandfather's cabin every night. Wendell drives up at dark. Nellie drives up with him on the nights he does not feel good. I send money in an envelope every month. Wendell has stopped trying to give it back. I have not been up to the holler in a while. I will go back. When I do, I will close the shutters myself at dark, and I will hook them, and I will sit in the front room, and I will not look at the ridge. The voice comes to my apartment in Lexington sometimes. Not often. In big weather mostly. Sometimes on quiet nights. It uses different voices. It has used my grandfather's voice twice, my mother's voice once, my Uncle Roy's voice one time, though I only met him a few times before he shipped out. It uses whatever voice is easiest for me to believe. I do not answer. I have never answered. Some nights I lie in the bed and I bite the inside of my lip and I taste the blood and I stare at the ceiling and I think about my grandfather in the hospital in Whitesburg on the morphine at the end. Wendell said he did not answer. Not even then. Not even at the end when he did not know his own name. I do not know if I will be that strong. I hope I will be. I light the wood stove at the cabin in my mind every night. I sit in the rocking chair by the stove in my mind. My grandfather is in the rocking chair with me, in my mind. He is reading a newspaper. He is pretending not to know I am there. I sit still. I do not answer.